Hey, everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Man, boxing history, that's what we do. It's not all we do, but it constitutes quite a bit of what we do. But I'm here with my boy, Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, and just fellow fight history fanatic. What's up, bro? How are you?
How's everything, my man?
It's all right, man. Boxing has been, I'd say, unexpectedly good thus far. I mean, we're only like a month or so into 2023.
Mhm.
So there hasn't been a lot, but what we have been given has been unexpectedly good. And so that's kind of the impetus or the motivation behind what we're talking about today.
Absolutely, man. Think about last week's fight. Emmanuel Navarrete against who was it? Liam
Liam
Wilson.
Wilson, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think the majority of fans that were going to watch that fight, me included, which I was working it, thought that the fight would be ended up the way it was. All right, it was an early candidate for fight of the year contender. Those guys beat the shit out of each other. Wilson was basically a novice when you think about it. He was only like what 10-0 or 11-0 or something like that. Like he had a very shallow record, and especially the thrown into the waters with a proven warrior like Navarrete, who's been just slam banging and destroying competition left and right since he came on the scene and massacred Isaac Dogbe. What was it, a couple of years ago? And Navarrete has one of those like unpredictable free swinging styles that's really hard to like really gauge and connect to because you don't really know what the fuck he's gonna do, and he can overwhelm you and everything like that. But the stars aligned that night, man. First off, Wilson had a deep set belief in himself. Guy originally from Australia, but he came over to the US and then started training at what was it, Barry Hunter's gym. And you got to give him credit for that because it takes a lot of guts to come from your own familiar territory and then go to another country and really double down with a proven track record, I guess, with a trainer and especially a gym that's like take no prisoners and you got to actually fight your ass off to get out of there. So he did that, gained himself some valuable experience and working sparring with all those guys over there. And he came to this fight extremely confident, and it showed. You know what I mean? He seemed at first Navarrete was, who was a slow starter, was it also looked like he was a little out of shape. You know what I mean? Like he had a little bit of a soft midsection. This fight was what at 130.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
and there was a little bit of controversy to that also. I guess you can allude to in a minute, but regardless, it just ended up being an incredible fight. Like Wilson and their styles just meshed perfectly, and um, whenever you felt that Navarrete was about to like start overwhelming Wilson would start coming back with flurries too. I was counting Wilson; he was landing some beautiful shots in the fight. And then when Navarrete went down, everybody fucking collectively went, "Holy shit!" You know what I mean? Because no one expected that. As far as I know, that might have been the first time Navarrete's been down. If not, that was definitely the most he's ever been hurt in a fight. And it looked like you were on the cusp of a major, major, major upset. It wasn't to be, but nonetheless, it was an incredible fight, and it wasn't one that anyone expected beforehand. Wilson just upgraded his stock by tenfold, and everyone on Twitter and around the world, boxing in general, was talking about how much they can't wait to see him again. So even in defeat, his stock rose, and Navarrete shows that he's still must see television after this. So
It's unfortunate because we also got to see it. I don't want to focus on the controversy because the fight truly was very, very good. It was, we're talking about unexpected wars today, and this is exactly what we got. We got an unexpected war. Liam Wilson really rose to the occasion, and in a lot of ways, he put forth a serious effort, but also on top of that, really stuck to a game plan that was giving Navarrete serious difficulty.
yeah,
And so
very disciplined.
yeah, he did a really, really good job. Like I said, he kind of rose to the occasion. But again, there was controversy involved, and part of that was with the weigh-in, like you said, weighing at 130 pounds. According to Wilson and according to a couple of different somewhat unbiased observers or witnesses, he had been weighing in at the 126 to 126 and a half range for this 130-pound fight. But that was like 20 minutes or so before the actual weigh-in was supposed to have taken place. And then when they got on the exact same scale, according to him, he weighed in closer to 129 and a half, and he was kind of like taken aback, like, what 129? And then I mean, it seemed kind of strange that he would be making the claim, I guess, but he said that he suspected there had been some tampering with, or I'm sorry, did I? No, I reversed that. I apologize. He was weighing in 129 and a half, and when he got on, he was 126 and a half. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. That wouldn't have made sense. That's why when I was like, thought about it first, I was like, what the fuck am I talking about? No, sorry. He had been weighing in like a little under 130. So he was about on target. And when he weighed in, he was like 126 and a half, which was far closer to featherweight. And he said he was like, whoa, what the hell? Like I'm not that clear of 130. But then moments later, when Navarrete weighed in, he weighed in just under 130. So the charge was made, or the suspicion was made, or whatever, that somebody had tampered with the scale, and thus Navarrete was actually overweight and didn't actually weigh in. I mean, like you said, he looked kind of pudgy during the fight. He didn't really look like he was that much in shape. Obviously, he put some weight back on. That in and of itself doesn't mean anybody fuck with the scale, but it looked dodgy. It just, and there was also the video going around on Twitter. I don't really know what to make of it because it was slightly edited and like slowed down here and
I know
cuts
it's what you're
here.
talking about. Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know what to make of that. I don't know that the video itself. I just know that it looked funky. And so that was not great. And so you don't want to hear things like that in a fight where the people are supposed to be making weight and shit like that. And on top of that, against the fighter who's basically, he doesn't have the hometown crowd with him or whatever. You know, he's kind of coming into somebody else's territory, even if he has relocated to the US. But then on top of that, Navarrete got a fairly long count. He spit out
No,
his.
that was absurd, my man. That was crazy. So I totally forgot about that. Yeah, Navarrete gets dropped. He gets dropped hard. Subsequently spits out his mouthpiece. So, and most of us agree that, like, especially considering what happened in Diego Corrales, Jose Luis Castillo won, where Corrales spit out his mouthpiece intentionally a couple of times to buy himself some seconds before he miraculously came back.
And another case where it's like, I hate to fucking talk about the controversy because it was such a great fight, but it was controversial.
It was, and even getting 1 point taken off saved him some more seconds too, because Cortez had to go and say like whatever, 1 point, 1 point.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
it's like teaching a fighter you can eat a point if you have enough power to get that knockout or something, It's
and
like,
at that point too, it didn't really
damn.
matter with Morales. He had already gotten dropped twice, so I mean, what's going to be another point at that point? You know what I mean? Like but yeah, Navarrete gets dropped, and then the referee did something that I can't recall ever really seeing before. If it's happened, it must have happened a long ass time ago. He gave Navarrete the mouthpiece to put him back in himself, more or less, right? Like, he didn't take it, he didn't bring it to a corner. He didn't even rinse it off or anything. Just grabbed it and kind of gave it to him. And you saw Navarrete fumbled it, a la Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas, where
Yeah, you can't do shit when you have gloves on,
have
dude.
gloves on. You can't do anything, let alone take a little small rubber piece of rubber.
Somehow he got his mouthpiece in too. Like, he got some
He
skills with that shit.
his head is clearly wonky.
I don't know. You might be able to, like, tie a cherry stem in his mouth. Maybe he's got some skills or so. I don't know, but this I don't think I've ever seen that either. And one of the worst things, in my opinion, when it comes to referees, and I'll be brief about it, I promise, is that in being indecisive, dude,
Yeah.
it's all, you can't, even if you make the wrong call, but you're decisive about it. It's almost, I'd rather that, and then you can go back and video or something. But dude was like, he was about to put it back in his mouth, and then he was like, I actually, no, here, you do it. Like, what the fuck are you doing, bro? And so then all that did was just eat up extra time. A lot of people forget too about the Corrales Castillo thing, was that immediately before that, it was Acelino Freitas that did it to Corrales, and everyone was like, oh, Freitas, what a fucking guy. But they excuse Corrales for it. So it's like, makes you think. But anyway, yeah, dude, it wasn't a good look. It wasn't a very good look as far as the Arizona Commission goes, with the weigh-in and then with the officiating. Overall, the officiating was not fantastic on the card. So it just did not really give a great look overall. And yeah, but beyond that, dude, it was a really, really good fight. It was a fun fight. Past Navarrete in the knockdown, Wilson really seemed to miss an opportunity in the wake of that because Navarrete looked hurt, dude. He looked about done. He was
And
doubled
Wilson didn't go
over.
to the body either. Like I remember, like I just said, I counted
That's
Wilson for that fight, and he threw an abnormally low amount of body punches. And Navarrete's body was there for the taking. Like I said, he was very
He was
fleshy.
hunched over. He
Yeah,
was against the
over.
ropes.
And the few times that Wilson went to the body, he had success. He did. He didn't go there very often, but he landed whenever he decided to throw it down
Yeah.
there. And you know, but I mean, again, he like this was his first major fight like this, and if anything, he should just be building in confidence because he fought a hell of a fight. And he
Yeah.
fought a fight that no one expected. Everyone thought he'd get blown out before 7 rounds. And I know a lot of people lost their bets whenever they were trying to hedge on, whatever round the fight was going to end in, above or below 7 or whatever it may be. Yeah. So
And I'd be remiss if we didn't at least bring up also the DAZN card because some of the results and kind of how those fights played out too. Um, I don't want to just bring them up because it was ladies boxing, but it was actually a pretty good card. Some of the action was fairly sloppy, but even so, the fights were entertaining and also notable because they featured, uh, well, in this case, they featured, the two undisputed fights between Alicia Baumgardner and Amanda Serrano. So, I mean, notable. That being said, they also kind of, like I said, wound up just being unexpected wars in a couple of cases, and some people had some funky scores all around, and I'm not really sure what to make of, how everybody went from there. And I don't think you had even had a chance to catch the card, man. You were working this weekend and doing all sorts of shit.
I was so busy this weekend that I'm still catching up on everything, but I've caught in highlights of the women's card, and yeah, they're both of them were just absolute wars. But as usually are, man. Serrano fights are usually must see, even if she has like overmatched competition. She still, creates entertaining fights. Same thing with Bob Gardner, who's become a major favorite over this past year with the way she built her super fight up with Michaela Mayer, came off with the win on that, and then after this fight too, she had a war with that, and then the post fight interview where she mentioned the reason why she kind of fell flat later on in the fight. So like yeah, and that makes it even more of a badass too because holy shit, like that's pretty incredible to say
Yeah,
that
dude. She had just started her period,
it just
basically. And I mean, dude, I'd imagine she's in a lot of pain. Might
yeah.
not have even been easy for her to make weight, etc., because water retention. So, yeah, dude,
Ow,
that was.
getting hit in the body. Ah, nah. I
Mm-mm.
mean, all credit to her. She's all the women on that card were bad as shit. It was a
You know,
great. It was a great fights. You know what I mean?
and
So
frankly, between uh Amanda Serrano, Alicia Baumgardner, Sky Nicholson, and Ramla Ali actually looked pretty good, but all of the favorites to some degree looked a little bit flat, and that made for the fights, being a little bit better than some people expected them to be. And I mean, that's been kind of the big issue with for a lot of people, and in reality for women's boxing is that it's still struggling competition wise, even though some of the divisions are indeed filling out little by little. It's still struggling competition wise in terms of the depths in the division. Again, getting better though. A lot of the
it was
names,
certainly grown leaps and bounds from the '90s
no
when
question,
Christy Martin and Lucia Riker and others were featured against
no
absolute
question.
actually women that probably just never even had a professional fight, even though they had padded records of 5 or 6 or whatever fights. So there we go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, and everybody on that card was an actual fighter, was a serious fighter. I mean, there was some funky styles. Who was it? Tanya Alvarez. I don't know that if I've ever seen a fighter. I mean, I mean, we've seen some pretty fucked up, stupid looking fighters over the years, but I just don't know if I've ever seen anybody with that exact style where they kind of just put their gloves in and just walk at somebody like that. Yeah, but it was kind of it was oddly effective for much of the fight. And Sky Nicholson was she did not have the kind of outing that she was looking for. And Tanya Alvarez was like, she kind of Mayorga'd her a little bit, just awkward and tough to pin down type of shit.
Those people, bro. You know what I mean? If you have a really awkward style, but you're rough and strong and somehow can make the awkward style work instead of just looking ridiculous, then
Yeah,
you're going to be a hell of a night for anybody. Mayorga is a perfect example. There's other fighters out there too who just had a
right, yeah.
really rough, awkward style that It's just you're not going to look good against them, and because
Yeah.
they're so up and tumble and strong, it's going to be a rough night regardless.
And then the last one I was talking about was Ramla Ali and Avril Mathy. And Avril Mathy had been criticized previously because she had or I think has also a notable modeling career. And so, anytime a woman is pretty, but also a fighter, or attractive and also a fighter, people are like, well, she's got to choose one. You can't do both. Why, I don't know, but she obviously proved against Ramla Ali going up like about a division and a half, actually, that she's clearly very tough, that she is a serious fighter, that she could take a punch, and that she was in there to win, even though she was outmatched in pretty much every moment of the fight, and in a few rounds actually did fairly well too. So anyway, top to bottom, it was an entertaining card and the women showed out, dude. They got to get credit. There's still a long way to go, but as you said, they've come a long, long way. And I know that it's going to hurt a lot of people to hear. It hurts me a little bit to say, but you're going to have to give a little bit of credit to Jake Paul for that, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of what you want to think of the guy, I mean, he's very over the top, him and his brother and all that.
There's
You
a
got
lot of stuff to criticize him for. Don't get me
tons,
wrong, but
tons, tons. That doesn't make them good people. All right, still,
yeah, you got it.
yeah, put it out there. But you can't deny, like you just said, Pat. You can't deny what he's done. You know what I mean in terms of getting the Amanda Serrano out there in the world like that. If it wasn't for him, I'm not sure if this fight with Katie Taylor would have came to fruition because think about it, all the times they tried to make it beforehand in the years past, and they've always come kind of close, and for whatever reason, it couldn't happen. It
Yep.
finally does. She's getting more attention. Everybody else is getting more attention. He makes sure that people on his undercard, like, in that sense, he's good for the sport. In that sense, he's actually looking forward to people. Yeah, I mean, he's looking out for people. So,
That's been kind of on the tail end of that card. And Amanda Serrano, she had a little bit of a struggle against Erica Cruz, but again, also Erica Cruz came to fight. Um, you know, that has been the talk on the tail end of this card and in the aftermath is that they're trying to make the rematch between Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor, and they definitely want to make it in Ireland, which I know some people are like, Ireland, come on, that's unfair. But it's for a whole bunch of reasons that I won't get into because it'd probably take a few minutes. Ireland has been in a bad way. And when it comes to sports and boxing in the last handful of years, there hasn't been a whole lot of notable, especially pro boxing happening in Ireland. And the amateur scene there has been really suffering in no small part because of Daniel Kinahan's involvement and subsequent, extreme fall from grace because of his involvement in Irish boxing and some fighters there, and also because of the frightening incident where people stormed a fucking weigh-in in Dublin with AKs and started shooting up the fucking joint. Jesus
yeah, it can't
Christ.
be doing that.
Yeah, that kind of discouraged people for a while. So Ireland has been, especially for a place that has been stereotypically involved in boxing for so long, for them to not really have that opportunity has been hurtful to a lot of people. And so that's a really big story and really big, has a lot of potential. And so that's kind of been the talk. That's where they're supposedly going. I don't know if they're going to Croke Park or if they're heading somewhere else, but it sounds like it's probably almost certainly going to happen, which should be huge.
It's going to be absolutely massive out there. Katie Taylor's a god in that country right now. And she has, you know, the Olympic pedigree and the world titles and everything she's done in her career to back that up. I mean, if I would consider her probably the number one pound for pound female fighter on the women's fighter out there right now. I mean, you can flip a coin between her and Clarissa Shields, but Katie Taylor is right up there. She's incredible. And I was at that first fight with Amanda Serrano at their fight at MSG. And Pat, that was one of the best fights I've ever been to. That was probably definitely the best fight I've seen at MSG. And just in general, like the atmosphere and then the way those two just delivered, they beat the shit out of each other that night. But it wasn't just wild, reckless slugging. Like there was just so much beautiful skill and nuances and the flows and the pace and back and forth and everything. Like it was a legitimately razor thin fight that I thought Serrano might have edged out, but I wasn't mad that Taylor got the decision. And so yeah, they need to do it again. And to have it in that country, it's gonna be even bigger than what it was at MSG, I think.
Yeah.
So,
It'll be massive, dude.
yeah.
Absolutely massive.
And they both come out and they both have subsequent fights since then. You know what I mean? And it's just that they're clamoring for it. This fight needs to happen.
They just did it doesn't sound like they're selling out like to the point where they're busting at the seams or stuff like that. But I mean, look, dude, I'm not trying to set a low bar here, but even so, even if you were setting a low bar, it doesn't matter because they are exceeding a lot of expectations. The women are as far as selling, and they just sold really, really well at Madison. It was a Madison Square Garden Theater, I think, right? And there was a great crowd for that. A lot of people are excited. Amanda Serrano is not the kind of superstar that Katie Taylor is in Ireland, but is still very, very recognized as a top fighter in women's boxing and in boxing overall. It's a big, big fight, dude. And it's the kind of fight where I think that also kind of to what you were saying too, we don't know yet, but maybe in about 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see a big chunk of Irish women were inspired by Katie Taylor, who have
Totally.
who have come out
Absolutely.
of Ireland. I mean, I don't know exactly what that'll mean, but it should be pretty cool. But anyway,
I mean, if you see all those videos too, when she's there with like little girls and stuff like that, who talk
it's
about how they're,
inspiring.
yeah, totally. Every fighter, if they're, depending on where they come from, whatever like that, they always have a following of people that are inspired by them, little kids who admire them and want to grow up to be like them one day. And good chance that a couple of them will try to end up becoming fighters after that, whether they become successful or not. Who knows? But we've heard those stories in the past. This is a tried and true
Mhm.
method that's been happening for decades and decades. So,
Yep. Felix Trinidad in the
yeah.
wake of Wilfredo Gomez, and then Juan Manuel Lopez, hint hint, in the wake of Felix Trinidad, Miguel Cotto, etc. So I mean, it's a lot of it travels in a pretty clear line in terms of inspiration and motivation and
Mhm.
whatnot. So speaking of which, though, that's exactly what motivated us to talk about some history today. These unexpectedly good fights that we have gotten in the last week or so. And hey, hopefully we get some more, but it's history time, bro.
History.
What about
Our
some of,
wheelhouse.
yep, these surprisingly good fights, unexpected wars, whatever nomenclature you want to use? Feed
Yeah.
me one.
All right, bro. You ready? We're going back to 1979. 1979. We're on the cusp of the 1980s before the big boom, glitz, glamour, boxing, the overall just greed of that decade. And the heavyweight champion is Larry Holmes in 1979. You know what I mean? At this point, Larry's still struggling for respect. He's still in Muhammad Ali's shadow. He's only made a couple of defenses of the heavyweight title so far. Guy, after his epic win against Ken Norton, who was considered a paper champion, so Holmes already was coming in with an asterisk on his back because Muhammad Ali had just retired but wasn't fully retired. There was still all these rumblings of him coming back, and with him in the spotlight, old grumpy Larry Holmes was always going to be on the back end. And defending your title against Alfredo Evangelista and Ozzy Ocasio was not going to get the public clamoring for you to embrace you as being the new kingpin. So as 1979 rolls around, Larry Holmes goes to New York City to fight an anonymous guy with a record of 19-8 by the name of Mike Weaver. And that's where we're at right now. I hope that was a good little intro.
Nah, dude, it's a good intro for sure. And a lot of the stuff that was happening immediately before 1979, we've done shows on in the past. And we might even reboot just because stuff always changes. We've gotten better, etc. But 1976, the Olympics. We were just talking about influence and whatnot's massive influence on the US. But then fast forwarding there, especially in the heavyweight division, Muhammad Ali, obviously winding down as a heavyweight champion, and a lot of that had to do with the rise of Larry Holmes, who came at least partially from Muhammad Ali's camp or had worked in Muhammad Ali's camp for a while as one of his chief sparring partners, and had been kind of taken under his wing and stuff like that. So there are a lot of and also of course Don King's U.S. Championship tournament. There's a lot of shit going on in boxing right in the few years immediately preceding this. So this is a very interesting time. But 1978, that's when Larry Holmes, goes at it with Ken Norton. Absolutely epic fight. But the heavyweight division, like I said, it's in a weird spot, dude. There aren't a
No,
ton
it
of
really was. Once Muhammad Ali retires, after defeating Leon Spinks in a rematch. That's when like ground zero basically happens, and it was like the cusp of the lost generation. So Leon Spinks becomes heavyweight champion in a massive upset against Muhammad Ali, throws the whole division up in a tailspin. Ali comes back, wins the belt, and immediately retires.
Well, it's like
Even
people
though,
knew it was going to happen sooner or later. They knew, Ali is obviously slowing down, but it was like people were like, against Spinks? What?
well, here's the thing too, is that this was the first time though. This is when the fucking division becomes split for the first time, because when Spinks beat Ali, Spinks was still there was Ali was undisputed champion. There wasn't no like split titles, anything like that. There was a WBC and the WBA, but Ali was both of them. And at that point, even though the WBC and WBA loved having splinter titles in every other division, at heavyweight they just left it as is because Ali was such a big name. Both of those organizations wanted him as their champion. They were fine with that. Once Spinks becomes champion, that's when they were ready to start like, you know what, we can start trying to do whatever we can. And Don King comes into the mix because at that point, Spinks had two options. One, at the WBC, he had to defend against Ken Norton. The other one, WBA, you can get a rematch with Ali immediately. Obviously, the more lucrative fight is rematch with Ali, as opposed to fighting a dangerous guy in Norton when you're not going to get not as much publicity, money, etc., etc. And there's a good chance he was going to lose.
Yeah,
so
it's a total pain in the ass to fight. I mean,
yeah,
unless you're a bomber, you're pain in the ass to fight.
exactly. Spinks wasn't really that. He was a swarmer, so he would have fed right into Norton. But so of course he goes with the Ali rematch. Don King gets into the year of the WBC. WBC has an absolute bullshit rule back then, where they say that you can't give an immediate rematch to a guy you just defeated for the belt or something like that. And so they strip Leon Spinks of the title. Just basically just to to satisfy Don King. So yeah, you know what I mean?
It's like the dude who gets cut by a head but has to get a point deducted, or it's like some
Yeah,
fucking rule
exactly.
that's just like, what?
Stupid rule that you don't really understand why they do it, but then when you think more about it, it makes more sense with all the money that is involved with it. So, anyways, not to get things so cluttered and confused, but after that happens, they strip him. Ken Norton fights Jimmy Young. That fight was supposed to be an eliminator. And once Norton beats Young by a controversial decision, he subsequently gets named as de facto champion. Spinks keeps the WBA belt, and then they go on their own direction. Anyways, back to WBC, like you said, Pat. Larry Holmes wins an epic decision over him, but now he's just kind of caught in a flux. Like there's, people still consider Ali the man. No one really likes Holmes like that. I mean, Holmes is a good fighter. He's clearly proven himself in the Norton fight, but I mean, his two title defenses against these two guys are not getting anyone excited. Like I said, Ocasio and Evangelista. Plus, every interview he has, all he's doing is complaining about Muhammad Ali. Ali's holding him down. Ali needs to get out of the spotlight. Ali just needs to go away. Blah, 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 blah. Why can't I get my respect? The fans are not trying to hear all that. Holmes was really bitter. And by the time he comes to New York City to fight Mike Weaver in 1979, no one's excited about this fight either. Weaver is an unknown commodity at this point. He has a really spotty record. And if you start looking into his record, there was a lot of losses there where you just kind of like, wait, what? For instance, he gets knocked out by Dwayne Bobbitt early in his career. Fine. A lot of people got knocked out by Bobbitt early on when Bobbitt was on the rise. But not only did he get knocked out by Dwayne Bobbitt, he got knocked out by his brother.
Yeah, he got knocked out by the not very good brother.
I mean, it's bad enough you get knocked out by one Bobbitt, but both of them? As Carlos Acevedo put in his article, that was, the twin great white hopeless back in the day. So, that wasn't a good thing to have on your ledger to get knocked out by both Bobbitt brothers. But then you got to think about this with Mike Weaver as well, all right? Weaver, when he first started his career, even though he was body beautiful and a former, Marine or whatever, he didn't take his career seriously. He really just fought basically just to pay the bills and what was needed. So he would take a fight on a week's notice, 2 weeks' notice, go to the gym, train for like a day or two, go to the fight, and then fight for 3 or 4 rounds before he ran out of gas and then lose. That was his whole game,
He just naturally looked like a fucking massive bodybuilder.
Exactly. Things were,
Hercules.
For the first year or so of his career, he ends up at 6-6. And like I said, he's been knocked out twice by Bobbix. Which is hilarious to think about in retrospect. And other guys he's losing to. But things start slowly changing for him at this point by the mid to late 70s. Even though he has a spotty record, people start taking notice of him because you see natural ability there, even though he might not see it. So first off, he gets with a manager by a guy by the name of Don Manuel, who was a well-to-do manager who was going to look out for him. For the first time in his career, he had somebody to look out for him. Second, he ends up hooking up with a trainer, a former fighter by the name of Ray Barnes. Ray Barnes was a good fighter back in the day. Actually, went the distance with Sugar Ray Robinson. Knew how to fight, and obviously knows how to train guys. So if Weaver's going to have somebody that's going to actually teach him some shit, you can't. This is about as good as it gets. Third, Weaver became a sparring partner for dun dun dun, who we just bring up before, Ken Norton, a regular sparring partner for him. Not only does Norton give him the nickname Hercules that Weaver would end up keeping for the rest of his career, but Norton also, like, training with Norton and sparring with him all those times started developing Weaver's style on his own too. He started, copying things with Norton, similar to the cross stomp defense, not completely Norton style, but like doing a version of it. Learning how to like throw flurries off of that, working off of the jab, things like that. Weaver became a good fighter all of a sudden. He still had a spotty record, but the fights that he rather would have been losing, now he's starting to win. And by the time he gets in with Larry Holmes now, like we said, he was 6-6. Now he's 19-8, still very unauspicious. And in 1979, if you just look at a record like that and you don't have the necessary tools to do the research on who he fought or whatever, you're gonna be like, who the fuck is this guy? So yeah, ticket sales at MSG were really, really slow. I mean, Don King was going above and beyond trying to get this fight to get any type of traction. Even putting Roberto Duran against Carlos Palomino, which would be a main event anywhere else, on the undercard, because you knew that would be a big fight in New York. Duran is absolute gold in New York. Palomino, recently deposited former welterweight champion. That's a big fight. If anything, Pat, you probably agree with me. That fight would probably be a pay-per-view main event today. Just that
yeah, of course.
Like, one of those guys would easily put that as like their pay-per-view. I mean, look, if you're gonna put fucking Keith Thurman against Barrios, Duran, Palomino, whatever. So he puts that as the main undercard attraction. Even as with Duran Palomino as the main undercard attraction, ticket sales were still lagging because they just figured Larry Holmes was in for a routine nothing. And not only that, New York City was on the cusp of bankruptcy. Like in the 70s, New York was in really, really, really bad shape. And the heavyweight division, the heavyweight title, I think, was only defended twice in the entire decade. And the first one was Ali Frazier, obviously the most epic fight ever. And then the second one was in 1977 with Ali against Ernie Shavers. That was it. Don't get me wrong, there was a lot of heavyweight fights in the Garden during the 70s, a lot of other fights too, but things didn't really work out. So here's where we are in 1979 now. And we got Larry Holmes, Mike Weaver for the heavyweight title, and yeah.
Dude, I could see, especially at the time going into that, Mike Weaver, he was on a little bit of a streak, but I mean, it wasn't like it was a fantastic streak. You had Bernardo Mercado, who at the time it was just coming off a loss to Big John Tate. So that in and of itself is kind of like, because a lot of people, even though John Tate was large, they were suspicious too, because he was just large and lumbering. He had power, but there wasn't a whole lot else there. And so, losing to John Tate, a lot of people were suspicious. But Mercado was a dude who had gotten his contract kind of pushed around a couple of different places, even when he was undefeated. He had some involvement with Joe Conforte when he had bought Oscar Bonavena's contract in the mid 70s. And so, Mercado was a dude who was well known also among like kind of as a sparring partner. He was a pretty well known sparring partner at the time. But then in any case, Mike Weaver wound up defeating Bernardo Mercado. And then after that, he goes on and he gets a win over Stan Ward. And I mean, again, like this is not Murderer's Row here, but this is, I guess, enough to kind of propel him up in the rankings and get him a shot against Larry Holmes in 1979. And I mean, at the Garden, this is a pretty big opportunity, bro. And even so, they wound up pushing over 14,000 people in there. But that being said, this was not the kind of fight where people were like, okay, this is going to be gangbuster shit. This is the kind of shit where people are like, let's Larry Holmes get through this and see if he can get some sort of shot at Ali after this, or, whatever. Like, they were looking forward to what was ever happening afterward.
I mean, think of this. All the major networks then rejected it. ABC, NBC, all of them. None of them wanted to air the fight. Who ended up airing it? HBO, which was a complete startup in 1979 when it came to airing boxing.
Well, and that kind of goes to what you were just talking about, dude. Pushing a fight to pay-per-view because it's not really going to get sold anywhere else. And I mean, you just like today, there are some advantages to that. Like, for instance, it gives you an immediate return as far as what that fighter is selling, like what the
Mhm.
interest is, et cetera. But obviously, the downside is that it's on pay-per-view. You got to fucking buy it.
Totally. So that was the thing. How many people had HBO back in 1979? I'm not even sure what they were airing back then. So yeah, this is where we're at. But to get to the fight, everyone like again, this thought it was just gonna be anticlimactic. Holmes beats him, and then he moves on to a rematch with Ernie Shavers later on in the year. But Weaver, to his credit, I mean, a guy that he said before the fight he was inspired by watching the Rocky movie on loop over and over and over to the point where he was convinced he was going to be Rocky. Put on the most awe-inspiring fight of his life. You know what I mean? Like at first, Holmes was landing easy, he was jabbing him and just kind of doing what he did in most fights. And Holmes too was very arrogant. Like in the beginning of it, if you watch it, like you can tell he kind of has disdain for Weaver and thinks he's not in his class, which he had every right to believe that, and kind of treated him as such. But when he tried to push up, and I forget which round it was when the tide started turning, but like there was a round where Holmes goes in there with full intention, I'm going to take him out now, and tries like throwing his flurries, but then Weaver starts fighting back, and Holmes almost seems a little surprised that he does. And the one thing about Weaver, you could say, even though like he can have lulls of being bored and like inactivity and yada yada yada, he had dynamite in both fists. And when he hit Holmes, Holmes had that look of like, oh shit, and then that's when the fun started.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle rounds, like toward the middle rounds, he started landing, and it was like, he was not like a he was kind of like a somewhat compact swinger, but he was a free swinger though, and he could bang, dude. And he was the kind of guy where like, he could catch his slipping, and that was the thing about Holmes too. Holmes could get arrogant in there, like you said. He could like get a little bit like complacent. Like, he could kind of get almost like formulaic. Like he'd just jab, jab, jab right, jab, jab right, left, jab, jab. He wouldn't really vary it up for a while, and it was almost like he'd start going to sleep a little bit. And that was the problem, is you could catch Holmes slipping. And that's why a whole bunch of fighters, especially fighters who were like, considered not that good or considered not on his level, sometimes caught him slipping. I mean, that was maybe the biggest knock against him, was that he could get caught slipping. And that's exactly what happened against Weaver a little bit. Right when Holmes kind of wades in, and I don't remember, 7, 6, 7, he kind of goes in and he's like, all right, like, let's end this shit. And Weaver just starts hitting him with the fucking 2-3, 3-2, 2-3, 3-2. He just starts going boom, 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 like back and forth. You're muted.
Oh, can you hear me? My bad. I
Yeah,
didn't even
there you go.
realize I
No,
was
no, it's
muted.
all good.
So nah, dude, it was incredible. What was incredible is that like Holmes is like you said, he's landing and he's doing his thing, but then Weaver starts rallying back. It started in round 4, and Holmes, and that's when like the battle of attrition started because Holmes realized he's in a
Start
fight
right,
now.
yeah.
He wasn't. I don't think he was in the top shape that he should have been because again, he kind of has a little bit of disdain for Weaver, and Weaver is now inspired. And not only that, the crowd who was noticing that this isn't going to be like a complete massacre of 3 rounds or whatever, and like seeing that Weaver is like giving Holmes trouble and that Holmes is fading a little bit, are starting to get wildly behind Weaver now too because they're sensing maybe an upset, and that's building Weaver's momentum. And the last thing you wanted to do with a guy like Mike Weaver was let him get into a rhythm because once you get into a rhythm, he's going to be hard to break like any fighter. And Holmes was allowing him to do that. And Holmes, like you said, even though he could box beautifully, he didn't mind getting to a battle of the trenches either if he had to, and he started letting Weaver do that. And that was the last thing he needed to do because Weaver was stronger than him on the inside, and he was landing and he was landing hard. And Holmes a couple of times was visibly hurt. At one point, it should have been called a knockdown. If it happened today, it would have been. I don't know. I don't remember the exact round, but Weaver caught him, and Holmes was skiddling across the ring like there, and the ropes held him up. And yeah, it was a compelling, incredible fight. So battling out throughout the rounds and stuff like that, they're going back and forth. And when it looks like Weaver might actually take over for good, that's when like around round 11 or so, Holmes just throws a desperation uppercut, just a beautiful one, and it ends up landing. You know, Holmes has always been known for a guy that's always been known for his 1-2. You know what I mean? Not even throwing the right hand as much. He's always known strictly for his left, mostly his jab. He had one of the greatest jabs in history. And but if he had to get in there, he had a wicked uppercut too that he could throw, on the inside. Like, you didn't see it often, but if he had to, when he was feeling good, he would put that shit on you, and that's what he did. And he could see he had everything left in it. He landed squarely on Weaver's jaw. And when Weaver goes down, um, I have a book. It's by the photographer George Kalinsky, who was the Madison Square Garden's resident photographer for decades. And it's a close up of Weaver on the canvas. You just see Holmes's legs, and then you see Weaver laying there with his mouth open, kind of glazed, and he's looking ahead, and he's just completely like just gone from that shot. But and that was the end of it. Basically, it was the end right there. But you can't say Weaver
And
put on.
I don't know if Larry had another 3 rounds in him, dude.
Oh, absolutely not.
So I
Absolutely.
mean, he was tired. He was getting dead tired, and he was like, and I mean, and Weaver. I don't know if Weaver had all that much either, but Weaver was like ready to go just on will alone. But that shot, well, it was kind of like at the tail end of like a combination. Like he had just kind of started going in on him in the 12th round, but that was like that rally was exactly what he needed, like real bad. But I mean, that it's often not really remembered. I don't know if you'd call it like a war, but it was really back in. No, I would. It was a
It
pretty
was a
good
pretty
war.
good fight. Oh yeah, no, that was an excellent
Nah,
fight.
fuck it, call it a war. Fuck it, I'm signing off on it.
That was a war because that was, completely unexpected. Holmes had to come through some shit to win that fight. That ended up becoming one of Holmes's more notable title defenses over the years once his reign ended in 1985. And thinking about what happened with Weaver afterwards too, yeah, it becomes even more like interesting and compelling because Weaver, like we said, there's other guys we're going to bring up that their stock obviously went super high after that fight, like Wilson's did this past weekend. But Weaver was able to capitalize on that, because after the Holmes fight, people were like, oh shit, blah, blah, blah. And then soon after, John Tate, who I'm sure we're going to end up doing a deep dive on one day on a show, is a WBA champion, right? And he decides to defend against Weaver in a move that Bob Arum thinks, and you think about it, it's actually not that bad of a decision because in your mind you're thinking, okay, Larry Holmes just went to hell and back with Mike Weaver. I'm going to put John Tate with him. Weaver just had a good night. Holmes looked like shit. Tate's my guy, and this should be an easy win for him, right? And then from there, Tate was going to fight Muhammad Ali for the comeback. And for more or less, that fight went according to the script because Tate's in their hometown. Tate is out boxing the shit out of Weaver, who was just walking into punch after punch after punch. Besides a brief moment in round 10 where Weaver landed a hook that got Tate's attention, kind of wobbled him briefly. Tate was on a commanding lead until that last round when Weaver landed one punch and knocked him completely stone cold silly. So, yeah. And then from there, after he lost the title controversially to Michael Dokes, Weaver still lasted throughout the entire decade into the 90s as a serviceable opponent. A guy that can still spring an upset here and there like he did against Carl Williams or another guy, but anyways, would just always provide some good experience for a fighter.
Yeah, dude. He had he threatened to go on a good run there, and had that not happened with Dokes, the Coetzee fight, that was massive in terms of history. The Tate fight,
Yep.
the ending to the Tate fight, massive. The Dokes fight in about a month after Mancini Kim, so it was a big like stop this early, and it wound up getting stopped way early. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened had that not, gotten stopped and had he had potentially gotten a win against Dokes. Yeah, I don't know, dude. A lot of stuff really was in flux there, but yeah, definitely an unexpected war with Holmes and Weaver, dude. That's a good call. That's definitely a
If
very good
he
call.
didn't, you know what? If Weaver didn't land that left hook on Tate, I'm not sure if Ali Holmes would have ever happened.
Yeah,
Because
dude.
that's
Especially
pretty funny.
well,
And like, not to say that Ali would have won. I think Tate would have beat Ali at that point too. But like, I'm not sure Ali would have taken. I don't know. It just would have been
yeah,
history.
that's just given where Ali was at that time too. It's like any old person who was at least decent could have stepped up and taken it. So yeah, a lot of weird shit going on in the heavyweight division at the time, though.
It was, but that had to be brought up. That was just one of those fights that no one thought anything of, and ended up being one of the better heavyweight fights of that time. So
Absolutely, dude, no question. That's a good call. I yeah, I did not go as far back for most of the fights that I had, but for the most part. But I had some fun ones. I guess I'll start with probably the most recent of the fights that I went for, just because it's the easiest to remember, it's the easiest to go off of, and it's probably spend the least amount of time on it just because there's like, less to discover about it or whatever. But it might some people might not like the fact that I'm saying it because they're gonna go, "What, dude? Everybody loved it." Juan Manuel Marquez versus Manny Pacquiao 4. And I know, dude,
You're
because
not wrong,
people are gonna be
man.
like, "What?"
Definitely not wrong.
Dude, I remember a lot of people were like, "This is so unnecessary. This is the dumbest fight. Why are they doing this? Manny needs to move on. We need the Mayweather fight, etc." And like, I'm not whatever, Sure, fine. We did need the Mayweather fight for sure, but like, eh, what do you want me to say? I knew that just in terms of styles, they match up well. They matched up well 3 times already. All 3 of the first 3 fights were entertaining fights that were well matched. I knew that the 4th was going to be too. Especially it's like, you keep matching the same fighters over like a decade, and sooner or later it's like they do is slow down. Like they're just going to get slower and take punches worse, so the fights are just going to get better. I mean, it's sorry, it's just, for the most part true. So that's what I figured going into it, but a lot of people were dismissive of it. And I get it. Like mostly I think in the vein of like, well, Pacquiao Mayweather needs to happen, so fuck anything that's not Pacquiao Mayweather. That was kind of like the thought. But I get it. It was just that shit wound up being an absolute fucking war of attrition that was like a hair from being stopped because Juan Manuel Marquez's face was like falling a fucking part, bro. Awful.
Well, it's true, man. It's easy to rewrite history, but this was wow. Looking back, this is what 12 years ago now. Going to be 12 years ago this year. This year will make 12 years, right? Because this fight happened in 20. No, 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 no,
11
no.
years. 11 years.
11 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So before that fight, man, like Marquez was already like slowing down. He wasn't very active. Yeah, I'm just going to look at his record right now because I don't remember. But like after the last Pacquiao loss, like think about that. He fights a guy named Licar Ramos, which is a fight I don't even recall. And the Casitas fight was before that. And then the Juan Diaz fight was before that. So yeah, Juan Diaz, Casitas, this guy Ramos, then he loses to Pacquiao. And then he has one fight against another guy that I don't even remember this fight, Sergey Fenchenko, something like that. And then he's gonna fight Pacquiao. And in all these fights, Marquez, like remember the Casitas fight, he gets dropped. Like the Diaz fight, both Diaz fights, it was like especially the first one, it was the war and everything like that. And then when he lost the third fight with Pacquiao, that was one of those fights that like neither guy really set the world on fire. I don't recall it being like it was a compelling fight, but it wasn't one of those fights that you would just like, oh my god, you know what I mean? Like Marquez, you knew always had the style to beat Pacquiao, but at the same time, Marquez wasn't setting the world on fire at that point either. And then by the time they start coming into 2012, and Pacquiao is still on a roll, like even though he lost that bullshit decision to Tim Bradley, like he's still considered the top guy on the planet. Marquez looks like he's now on the down end of it. Yeah, Pat, like you said, everyone thought that this was just going to be like a culmination where Pacquiao was just going to bludgeon him.
Yeah, a lot of people just thought this is unnecessary. Like, why are we doing this? And the Juan Diaz fight, dude, Marquez struggled real bad in that fight. Juan Diaz wasn't considered a puncher. And so people were like, maybe he's too high up in weight now. We don't know what's going to happen. you know, there were a lot of variables. So I get why they would say it. And I'm not like trying to, I told you so too hard. But yeah, it was just a fight that was not viewed as anything more than, let's get through this and then we can get to Mayweather Pacquiao or some shit like that. And then sure enough, dude, early on, and I guess I should also put on, I should also unfurl my fucking bias here. I scored all 3 of the first 3 fights for Marquez. I thought that he won the first fight by a point. I don't even remember how much. I just remember it was a point because at the time I was like, oh fuck, he overcame 50,000 knockdowns and still won. I mean, he outboxed the shit out of Pacquiao apart from like one round in the first fight. It was crazy, but even so, that one round was bad. And then in the second fight, I thought that he won a bit more convincingly. And then in the third fight, I thought he was like, a clear winner in the third fight. I know a lot of people did. A lot of people felt that was kind of like, not robbery status, but leaning that way. And so anyway, again, biased. I thought Marquez should have won all three of the first three fights, and then didn't really look super good for him early on. And we talked about it earlier before we started recording. He throws like out of nowhere, like from like across the ring, like a leaping shot, and Manny's like, it's the
Dude,
one of
he
those
got
like,
so like the knockout like wipes away almost everybody else's memory of the whole fight. But yeah, that was a highlight real knockdown, man, because Pacquiao went flying from that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, if the knockout had not been so shocking, that would have been like the moment of the fight because it was so
Yeah.
cartoonish. He's like just like blah,
I mean,
flies across the
they
ring.
always had some vicious knockdowns in their fight. Like obviously the first fight with the 3 knockdowns. The second fight where remember Marquez was like coming for an uppercut or something, and Pacquiao caught him with a left right there. And Marquez like bounced like a basketball off the canvas because just the way his body was, the momentum of getting punched right there at the same moment just collided. Yeah. So like, but that knockdown, dude, yeah, he threw like an overhand. It was like a video game fastball, like where like in Fight Night. When like you hold the controller so you get the maximum leverage right there, and then you just let it go. And sometimes it connects, sometimes it doesn't. When it connects, it knocks the shit out of your opponent. Well, it knocked the shit out of Manny.
Yeah, he was not expecting that punch right at that
I
moment
was
at all.
surprised he got up, man, because that was a vicious shot. That would have knocked most
Oh
people out.
yeah, like his head, like knocked back and
Oh yeah,
on the
yeah.
canvas and shit. Yeah, he wasn't bracing for that whatsoever. But then, Manny was like, "Fuck this," and just started bludgeoning the. They went to war, but the
He did.
problem was that, dude, Marquez. It's like once he starts getting hit, like it's like his nose breaks on a whim, dude, and he starts doing the shit where he's like he
Yeah,
just can't like close his mouth, and there's like blood all over his face. His face is all fucked up. I think he had a cut over his eye too. Dude, I mean, and this was 6 rounds. Like it wasn't even halfway through the fight, and he was fucked up, bro. He got hurt. I mean, it just turned into an absolute bloodbath, bro. And it looked like Marquez was absolutely on the verge of just ruin. Like his career was about to be over in moments. And then I dude, I remember my daughter, she was 2 at the time, and she was asleep in her room because, we had like put her to bed and shit like that. And the fight, it was the end of the fight and it had gone somewhat late-ish or something like that. And I remember I was watching and I'm just like, holy fuck, this is so good, trying to keep it quiet. And then the knockout happened. And I just remembered being like, ah! Oh, like trying to yell but not too loud because my daughter's asleep. I'm like, babe, he's dead, knocked out, dying. It's like, so it was shocking, bro. Because I
You're,
mean,
it was
he had
crazy.
been knocked out before. It's not like, is unheard of, and he'd been hurt before.
But no,
Marquez had hurt him
I
before.
never see the way he just fell face forward and just not moving. You know what I mean? Just plain.
Literally, social media was like, he's dead. He's
Yeah,
dying right now. And I'm not trying to even make light of it because we were all just like, oh my God.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The way that he fell was just like, and then once everybody figured out he's okay, it was like memes,
Totally.
memes for fucking days. Poor
You
guy.
know, like that was the 2 vicious knockouts. I was at the studio working at HBO that night because
Oh my God, dude.
when I was doing Punch Zone, and we all fucking went nuts when that happened. Ah! And then we, like you said, we got hushed because we're like, wait a minute, he ain't moving. Did he die? And it
Mitt
was
Romney.
yeah, yeah. It was the same
Fuck.
reaction when Pacquiao flatlined Ricky Hatton, and and you saw Hatton laying there, and he's like, and we're like, oh my god, he might have did he just kill him? And then you see like Hatton like slowly moving, like, oh, he did it, okay, yay! Same thing with this one. You're just like,
Yeah.
because it's the way he jumped in, man. He leapt right into it, and Marquez didn't even throw full extension. It was like 6 inches, just you know.
Yeah, it was like such a weird shot. Like in
It's the way Pacquiao's head, like, all right. if you watch for the wrestling fans who listen to this show, if you see a wrestler get their neck injured, that's the way I can explain it because that's the way Pacquiao's head looked. Clearly, he didn't break his neck, but I mean, like, if you watch a wrestler like Sabu, for instance, Pat, you know who Sabu is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sabu's broken his neck a couple of times, and there's videos of it. You can see it, like the way he jumps and he slips or some shit, and you see he hands it, and you see his neck just kind of like compressed in, like just the way
Yeah, and it's like they go limp.
The way Pacquiao's head goes, you see it jolt back. It looked like his neck just like got shot into his shoulders like a turtle, like it was being like shot back into his shell. It was
Like
crazy.
some shit the human body's not supposed to do.
Oh yeah, and if you get hit like that, yeah, your whole body's gonna short circuit and you're out. And that's what happened. And there was always controversy after that fight too. Oh, because Marquez hooked up with this shady nutritionist. Was it Mimo Heredia? And
yeah, Memo Heredia, who's
the
still
fat and the chest acne that reminiscent of an '80s wrestler who was clearly juicing that one at one point or nothing. But who knows?
well, yeah, shit that's making drinking his piss look fucking innocuous.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there was definitely some controversy to that, no question. But amazingly enough, Pacquiao came back from it. That's amazing in and of itself that he would come back from a knockout like that. And not only come back, but do
Yeah.
well, like do have an actual career after that is pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a knockout like that, I think everybody was getting ready to write Pacquiao off, and rightfully so. I mean, that was bad. Like to get a knockout like that, a lot of guys would never come back from that. A lot of people would never want to come back from that. Rightfully so. Like when the knockout that vicious and everything you've accomplished, maybe you want to go out on one more win, just like for your fans or something like that. But in terms of making a major impact and really coming back, nah. But no, Pacquiao, he went on to still have another after that. What think of what he ended up doing in that decade. Even if he wasn't fighting that much, he still ended up having an incredible to solidify him as one of the all-time greats. And
Amazing.
Marquez, this was what he needed. Like he created 3 fights of absolute frustration, trying to always cling to get that respect that Pacquiao had that he felt should have been his. And he finally, with that one punch, erased everything. That was the biggest one. You got to give that to him. It was absolutely incredible for that to happen. And I was very happy for him to win that fight because, if you're a guy like you said, Pat, if you had him winning all 3 other fights before that, then this was like icing on top of the cake that he finally just knocked him out once and for all. Didn't have to go to distance, nothing like that. I knocked his ass out.
And then did the saltiest shit imaginable and then refused to fight him again.
Yeah,
Was like,
exactly.
no, that's it. We're done. Fuck you. I'm out of here.
And
And I got it. And I got your girl. And I danced with her. Fuck you. He just didn't even care. It's just hilarious.
His career was basically done after that. He lost a whole hub decision to Tim Bradley. And then he beat Mike Alvarado, and that was it. But I mean, after that, after knocking out Pacquiao, you really don't have to go on a crazy run. You've already solidified yourself. Add a couple more.
And another thing that knockout did give us was a great, semi-viral moment from Marco Antonio Barrera reacting to it just as I want to say it was Finito Lopez and somebody else like Ricardo Celis or somebody else calling the fight. And they're when the knockout happened, they both stood up and they're like, oh, some shit like that. And Marco Antonio Barrera is just looking at the monitor going, like, speaking of salty, sour grapes, motherfucker, dude. God, I was a Barrera fan too, but God, that guy's just the sourest fucking sourpuss.
Dude, whenever he would lose and lose badly, it was always a scene.
Yeah, somebody was getting a water bottle thrown at their head or something, dude. Like, what the
Like
fuck,
after
bro?
Junior Jones stopped him in the first fight, remember? Instead of them looking after Barrera, who was laying there bloodied and bludgeoned in a corner, clearly concussed, he's splayed out. His fucking cornerman comes in and takes a sponge, which he should have been using on Barrera, by the way, with the water and everying, and then flings it at Jones' head. He's fastballs.
He just beat his ass. What do you want him to do? He's won.
What's a sponge gonna do to anybody? This is gonna hit him on the shoulder. I'm gonna feel that shit. Which he did.
Just doing his job, beating your fighter's ass. Don't be a bitch.
And then the same thing after Pacquiao bludgeoned him in the first fight, the way they came rushing in there in the fight, the whole thing, and they just look so pissed. Oh God.
I know, dude. They
Oh,
like
yeah,
made him look worse. Like, geez, bro.
yeah, seriously.
Nah, that was I know, like it's not super fair. It's not like the best, but it was an unexpected war.
I mean, he couldn't do a thing with Pacquiao. Marquez, and as much as we love Barrera, I'm always going to rate Marquez a cut above him too. I think he just was slightly better than Barrera in all aspects, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, it's just Marquez also had the style to better deal with Pacquiao than Barrera did, because Barrera only won like maybe 2 or 3 rounds tops in the 23 rounds he shared with Pacquiao. So
And I think that it was immediately after that knockout too. Was right when like an Eric Morales fight was like that was
yeah,
the time, dude. That was the time. And then they
yeah.
didn't do it, and I was like, oh no. But
I mean, we still got it, but yeah.
yeah,
Oh, you're talking about Marquez Morales.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's always a big regret. That's
It was
you
so
know,
close. It was right there. You could have done it, but you didn't. Fuck.
kind of like when we almost had Tito Corte or like Corte like Whitaker. We were right on the edge of it. But yeah, Marquez Morales would have been amazing. Oh fuck.
It's all right. It's all right. Fuckers.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. What's another one?
All right, we go to my list over here. You know what? Just to bring it up because it's kind of a deep cut, but I watched it the other day for the first time and it was pretty awesome. Um, our old friend Tommy Morrison against Ross Purity.
Yeah, Ross Purity, of course, best known for handing Vladimir Klitschko his first, and at the time when people knew it, his only loss. People like Ross Huity? What? Who?
Yeah,
What?
oh yeah, yeah. Again, like we love the '90s, especially me, like the wheelhouse of the heavyweight division. So I can talk about that for hours on day. But this was one of those fights again that Morrison, a very inconsistent guy, but super popular during his time. Um, how do you explain it? Like Morrison used to catch fire, dude. You know what I mean? When he came out, good looking blonde white dude from the Midwest, knocking the shit out of everybody left and right. Rocky Five movie, that story, which was probably bullshit about him being related to
John
John.
Wayne. Yeah.
What did they say? He was his nephew, his great nephew, or something.
At first, I thought you was going to say that story about him not having HIV. I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, that too.
Stop
Yeah,
contacting me, Trish.
yeah, please stop like messaging. Anytime I do anything Tommy Morrison, I get some, and you see, on Twitter where it says click subsequent comments where there's like some vulgar shit in it. You know what I mean? Like you
Without
see it,
fail.
like, huh?
Without fail. Like,
And then you
leave
click
us
on it,
alone.
and there she is with like 2 paragraphs worth of stuff and a couple of like some photos I
And
don't
some
need.
YouTube
Yeah,
links.
and a YouTube
Leave us alone.
link. I like Tommy, please. All right, I like him.
Yeah.
Like,
It's not
I forget.
disrespect. Just leave us alone.
Seriously. But regardless of that, Morrison was, by the time this fight with Purity comes up, this was in 1994, and um, Morrison basically at this point he had already beat up George Foreman for the WBO belt, which was a spurious belt at that point, but he had lost to Ray Mercer, beat Foreman for the belt, and then got knocked the fuck out by Michael Bennett, and subsequently blew what was it like a $6 million payday or so against Lennox Lewis back then, which he was supposed to have. So yeah, Morrison. But the thing is, even though that happened, he was still popular. Like you can't add the fact that a guy like Morrison, when you're a box office attraction, you bring in money, you're exciting as a fighter, yada yada yada. You're gonna get multiple opportunities. Arturo Gatti lost how many fights in a row, all on HBO, and he still got brought back. You know what I mean? If you're popular and you're fun to watch, you'll get more opportunities. Even Broner, who is not fun to watch because he's such a loudmouth idiot, he'll bring in networks things. So how many times he loses and loses?
Like 2 days ago, he's talking about making good of his second chance, and I'm like,
what's second chance? It's like your 18th.
what?
Yeah.
Running out of fingers, bro.
Seriously, bro. What's that meme when you see the scientist looking around with all the things wrong?
Yeah. Doing some hard math here, some
Yeah.
trigonometry, bro.
So by the time he lost to Michael Benn and subsequently lost his belt in his hometown, for instance, he went back on the circuit again, like he always did after losing a big fight. Usually in the Midwest, knocking out a bunch of underachievers, no hopers, scrubs, whatever it is, because that was the Morrison way. And it was easy to do. Rack up 5-6 easy wins, get back on television, where a big fight.
It's true.
So, first off, it works out well. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say really quickly, I gotta respect it, dude, because not a lot of fighters do that these days. You know what I'm saying? Like, no fighters are taking like interim fights anymore. That shit don't even happen.
Nah, man. The '90s, even like it's crazy. The '90s, I was about to say they weren't that long ago. In 1994, is almost fucking 30 years ago. So it is that long ago.
I know.
It doesn't. Wow, it's crazy to think, man. We're old as shit, bro.
What are we talking about?
The 2000s weren't that long ago, okay? There we go.
Jesus Christ.
90s were pretty long ago, but it was a whole different world back then. But like, yeah, especially if you were a fighter around the Midwest, around other surrounding areas, that was your gimmick. You stood busy. You kept, even if you were a high profile guy, you kept busy. You know what I mean? You were able to back then. There was, boxing business is a lot different back then as it was now, where you can find opponents, guys who had subsequent name changes, this and that, especially a fight in Mississippi, Tulsa, Oklahoma, this place, that place, where there's barely any sign of a fucking real life commission going on. And you can find any bullshit doctor that would just give you the most basic of whimsical physicals and sign you off.
Where is today's Wimpy Halstead? Where is our Wimpy Halstead?
Yeah, who Morrison actually knocked out at one point.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? There was tons of guys like that. So Morrison goes on the circuit, knocks out Tui Toya, Bruce Scott, Sherman Griffin. Just easy wins. And then he fights a guy by the Ross Purity. The heavyweight journeyman, especially in the 90s, was a very important commodity. You had guys there that were just made to go the distance and give you good experience. Jesse Ferguson. What's his name there? Everett Bigfoot Martin, who just passed away. Marion Wilson. Jeff Wood. There's a lot of guys back then that were just really, really tough litmus tests. You probably weren't going to get by them, but you were going to go the distance and you were going to learn something against them too. Like, it wasn't going to be an easy walk in the park. You might win every single round, but chances are you were going to struggle. Purity was one of those guys. He was 8-8, former football player, but a dude that Morrison was supposed to bowl over, And as we found out later on in his career, Purity was one of those journeymen that, even though if he wasn't going to win, he was strong as shit. He was really durable, and he wasn't going to get knocked over really easy. And Morrison, as he always did in all of his fights, starts shooting his load early on. Left hook, trying to blow you out, throwing flurries, everything like that. Purity ain't doing much, but he's also not going away either. You know what I mean? And every time Morrison starts throwing one of those little flurries, Purity just kind of covers up, takes it, wobbles a little bit. He was certainly hurt many times in that fight. And the announcers were like, "Oh, he's ready to go. He's ready to go," because it was on ESPN. So I want to say that was Barry Tompkins and I think Bernstein, or somebody else. But like, they were, everyone's like, "Oh, he's ready to go, ready to go." And all of a sudden he doesn't go. Like, he starts fighting back. You know what I mean? And then in round 4, or excuse me, like around like the middle rounds, Morrison starts getting tired. And those left hooks start becoming more belabored. And Purity, who's been taking punches but still fighting back a little bit, starting to get confidence back because he's realizing Morrison is starting to get. And all of a sudden, all it takes is one punch when a guy like Morrison start turning the tide. One of those wild uppercuts. Tommy Morrison's head goes snapping back. All of a sudden, the same thing we've seen against Ray Mercer, we saw against Bent, when we saw against Carl Williams, even though he came back to win against other dudes, you see the eyes start getting glassy. You see his tongue start hanging out. You see his arms go down.
It was like so obvious when he got either tired or hurt too. Like, he just got ragged, like out of nowhere.
My man did not have a poker face at all. Once he was hurt, you knew he was gone.
Hell no.
Purity's eyes awakened like, holy shit, what the fuck just happened here? You know what I mean? And a reference I've used before, but it was like a pit bull on a pot roast. He sees that. He's like, you see Morrison's head. And he starts dropping. And the announcers, "Oh no, down goes Tommy Morrison." And Purity is so shocked that he's almost looking at his own shit like, "Oh snap," you know what I mean? And that's the thing with some of these.
It's like guys. A superhero who just discovered they have new powers. Like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Like in the first Spider-Man movie, remember when Spider-Man Tobey Maguire realized he had some shit. He was like, "Oh snap!" So Purity now realizes, wait a minute, I'm not just here to go to distance and lose the decision. I can win this shit. And then it becomes a battle of attrition. And Morrison wobbles him again. Like Morrison was always involved. Like you can't deny his heart. Like if you hurt him and he can come back, he was going to come back. That's why we love Tommy Morrison. And he did start coming back. But like, and it just became an absolute battle. And that wasn't not supposed to happen in this fight, Pat. That wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be an easy blowout. And they start brawling back and forth. And then when it looks like Morrison is going to win a decision because he had banked so many early rounds, but it was getting closer, round 10 happens. And what happens again? Morrison completely falls off the ledges again, man. Like he has nothing in the last round. Completely cooked. No stamina, no strength, no nothing. Like his tongue is hanging out, just dragging across the canvas. And Purity is feeling good. And Purity comes out there and the same thing, man. This wasn't a guy that was like a Roy Jones stylist or nothing. Purity was a crude brawler, but he knew how to throw punches if he hurt you. And again, he same thing. Started throwing an uppercut, then right hand, the left hook, an uppercut, boom. Like same basic combinations you would play in a video game. If it works for you, you just gotta use it over and over. That's what Purity does. But you don't need that against Morrison. He drops the shit out of him again. And the same face, they gave Morrison a draw. In a fight Purity probably would have won.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, realistically, he maybe could have taken that, especially since it was a 10-round fight and he got 2 knockdowns. I mean, that's 2 10-8 rounds, dude. That's big in a 10-round fight. Like,
Plus,
you know,
Morrison was faltering in some of those later round too. You give 1 or 2 of those to Purity, he wins the fight.
yeah, dude. Well, and he had fought in Atlantic City, I think, a handful of times too. I'm not going to say it was like his hometown, but I mean, he had experience there. But well, and on the East Coast in any case. But I mean, dude, even I'm trying to even think just as far as the timeline. But when was it? Because it mustn't have been too long after this that Tommy was, that it came out publicly that he had HIV.
Well,
Couldn't
look,
have been
so
that long after this.
um, yeah, actually, so the fight with Purity happened in July of '94.
Yeah.
And he fought Ruddock in '95, Lewis in '95. And yeah, his career was more or less over after that.
Because I know that, remember, there was controversy though, because they had to be shopping around for commissions who were going to be fucking buying that shit, because he had already been, there was rumors that he'd already been diagnosed and shit like
Yeah.
that. So anyway, I'm not going to go look up the
Well, there was
timeline,
even
but
some rumors recently that surfaced a few years back that there was rumblings that he might have been tested positive for AIDS back in like HIV back in like 1989, 1990.
I had heard about that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
had
I've
heard
heard
about
about
that
that
too.
too. I mean, I'm not going to say, with full confidence that's true. I don't
Of
know.
course, yeah.
We don't know that. But if you know his lifestyle, if you know what he was into, if you read the book that Carlos Acevedo wrote about Morrison that came out last year, Morrison got around, man. Like he definitely, you know what I mean, especially back in the day, dude. He didn't leave his areas too. You know, people get rich and then leave wherever they come from to go to Vegas or wherever they go. Morrison stood as a local celebrity. He was very comfortable staying in Tulsa and staying around the surrounding Midlands area, just being the king of the world over there. So yeah, I don't know. Who knows, man? Morrison had a very fascinating, sad. There's so many words to describe his life. You know what I mean? And there's still a lot of mystery out there too. Even though there has been books written about him, there's a lot of stuff out there and all that, and we can kind of gauge what is bullshit and what is not. There's still a lot of mystery. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that will never be known, and he basically took to his grave, and there's no point in trying to shit on anybody to get to the truth or whatever. But at the
yeah.
same time, yeah, dude, it's kind of wonky, and I wouldn't really put it past anybody in boxing with enough money to really get anything by anybody. Dude, in the early 2000s, it was uncovered. I was just looking for it and didn't see it because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there was a doctor who was totally fabricated and totally fake, whose name was put on, like, it was like hundreds of physicals for fighters in several different states. And I mean, like, fighters' records were totally, and this was like 25 years ago. We're not talking about back in the 70s, 60s, 50s, some shit like that, where it's like, boxing was always corrupt. we're talking about somewhat recently. So for me, is it like plausible that somebody could have hid Tommy Morrison's AIDS or HIV that long? Yeah. No, I
Absolutely.
don't think that's
I
impossible
mean,
whatsoever.
it was other like sketchy situations back then. Remember, middleweight Lamar Parks, um, who was a scheduled to fight. I think it was Gerald McClellan or something for the middleweight title before his test finally came up and they found out that he was positive for HIV. Um, Off the top of my head, you had another one too, Ruben Palacios. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with that name?
Yeah,
The
Palacios, yeah.
Palacios, excuse me,
Yeah, yeah.
Palacios, former what was it, WBO junior featherweight champion from Colombia or something. He tested positive for HIV soon after losing his belt. Um, Proud Kilimanjaro was another dude I think
Yeah, I
back then.
was I was just about to say, yeah.
But we share the same brain, so like it was yeah.
Yeah, it's a relatively famous one. And they had also there was rumblings around Proud Kilimanjaro too, similar to Morrison. People were claiming that he had never tested positive. It's
Crazy.
sad. It's sad. But yeah, dude, no, that's a good one because I would not have thought of that one
I
for
mean,
sure.
shout out to our boy Jay Seklo for uploading that recently. I mean, it was just one of
Dude's a
those fights.
god.
I've seen highlights, but yeah, that fight was awesome. And if you haven't watched it, it's up there. It's fun to watch. Morrison fights are always fun to watch. So
Yeah, I don't know if Jay Seklo or whoever's behind that account is actually like checking out our show, but sometimes whoever's behind that account be uploading some shit that we like just talked about, and I'm just like, bruh, are you
yeah,
watching the
yeah,
show?
really, exactly.
So if you are, thank you. But anyway, if you're not, then we're stupid. But in any case, all right, dude, I got another one. I'll just kind of go back chronologically for this here.
Perfect.
Juan Manuel Lopez versus Rogers Mtagwa. I know,
Woo! Great fight.
dude, it's one of those kind of closet classics type of fights where, I mean, the year that it happened, it wasn't a closet classic because that was definitely on the contenders for fight of the year without question.
Uh,
But it was definitely not supposed to be fight of the year status. You talk
that was
about influence like we were bringing up earlier. Juan Mal Lopez was supposed to be the next Felix Trinidad because Miguel Cotto, that's how he was billed early on, but I think it became apparent really quickly that he just was not like that guy. Not because he wasn't good, but just because he didn't really have that kind of personality. He was kind of cool, kind of quiet, contemplative, obviously prone to getting in some wars or whatever, but he was always like, he was a little bit more safety first. Like, and he was unabashedly safety first. Whereas Juanma Lopez was like, let's go to fucking war, bro. And that was kind of how Felix Trinidad was. So people were like, that's the next Trinidad. And clearly, he was afforded, some pretty solid matchmaking overall. But he was viewed as the next kind of Puerto Rican superstar without question. I guess he kind of did become one for a minute there. But
dude. He was huge, man. In the year, like the what do you say, like late 2000s, early 2010s. Um, Lopez was as big as he was gonna get over there at that moment. Man. He caught fire. He was huge. Oh yeah.
yeah, no question, dude. And it's funny too because I looked this up because it's just a fight that had slipped my mind, and then I watched it and I was like, oh yeah, Rogers Mtagwa, dude. He was a brawler. He was a dude who's from Tanzania, and he'd come over to Philadelphia and was actually promoted by J. Russell Peltz. Handled by J. Russell Peltz, and I don't think there was any sort of mystery or any sort of like, nobody was lying about as far as what they thought his potential was, or nobody thought he was going to be Ray Robinson. Nobody thought he was going to be anything like that. He was a brawler, but he was clearly very tough, and he was down to scrap. And at a certain level, that's you need fighters like that. And well, I guess you need fighters like that on all level, but especially to contrast, on the upper reaches of a lot of divisions. You need guys who can take it, who can be durable, who can last and whatever. But Rogers Mtagwa, anyway, had just had a fucking brutal war with Tomas Villa. The problem was Tomas Villa is just like, some people would be like, who the fuck is that? I don't know what you're talking about. It was a fight that happened on like Univision or something like that. And so it was not viewed by a ton of people. But that in 2008 was a fight of the year contender for sure, because that shit was a brawl. Tomas Villa was like not taking backward steps. Neither was Rogers Mtagwa. Shit was a nice brawl, dude. I watched that shit just to kind of prepare myself, and it was good. But it was also considered like, all right, Tomas Villa is not on Juanma Lopez level. And if Rogers Mtagwa is struggling against a guy like Tomas Villa, who's not a bad fighter, but like, if he's going to go in against Juanma Lopez, like, dude, this is going to be bad. And that's just kind of how it was viewed, going in.
Absolutely, man. Mtagwa, like you said, he was a guy that was pulling my pelts. He was featured at the Blue Horizon a number of times. I remember him, correct me if I'm wrong, on Friday Night Fights tonight, like on the ESPN shows, on the ESPN2 shows. He was featured. And a guy that, like, he didn't look like a world beater, like you said. He was struggled against other like-minded, mid-level competition and made for good fights, but not someone that you ever thought was ever going to, like, compete with the elite. And if he was going to get a shot, he'd probably get beat down relatively quickly, fade back to obscurity. Juan Manuel Lopez, his rise started as I was starting to work at, CompuBox and, like, me moving out here and stuff like that. So I remember watching him and working his fights a lot back then. And actually, there's a little bit of trivia here. The first time Punch Zone was ever featured on HBO was for a Juan Manuel Lopez fight, and I was actually doing the Punch Zone before that. Like, for that fight, it was Juan Manuel Lopez against Jerry Penaloza.
Okay.
Yeah, when like Lopez landed like fucking 400, 500 punches to Penaloza's poor head. Because Penaloza was just a tough as nails guy that wasn't going to go down, so Lopez was just beating him, beating him, and beating him. But like you said, dude, he was one of those guys that when he first came on the scene and knocked out Ponce de Leon in the first round, that was like everybody was like freaked. I mean, everyone was really excited. That was like a spectacular moment too, because De Leon was known as a bruiser and a banger himself. That's a spectacular win. So for him to get knocked out so suddenly like that, easily is going to propel you to be like a hero in Puerto Rico, or at least one of the thought about to be one of the next big superstars. Even the very elderly Mario Rivera Martino was in the ring that day. I don't know if you noticed, but after Lopez beat him up, Martino was in there. And this was, for people who don't recognize him, Mario Rivera Martino was the Puerto Rico's correspondent for Ring Magazine, every other magazine it was for boxing for, Jesus Christ, what, back in the 30s? You would say 40s maybe? Up until the early 2000s. Like he was basically like the main voice of like boxing in Puerto Rico as their writer and everything for decades upon decades. And late in his life, he was able to see Juan Manuel Lopez get coronated like that. And to see the look on Mario Rivera Martino's face was pretty cool. He was like elated. It was awesome. But anyways, to go from there, like Lopez was a destroyer, man. He was beating the shit out of anyone he was fighting. Like he knocked out, I think it was Steven Lebueno, who was a former champion. He knocked out a few other guys. Like he was just bludgeoning dudes left and right. So yeah, the Trinidad Monk year was coming true, especially because not only did he have a more fun style than Cotto did, like you mentioned, but also because I think he had a more of like, I think he like related more to the fans, kind of a la Trinidad did, than more so Cotto, who was more reserved and kind of laid back. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So they can relate to him more. Like the fans love Cotto, but Cotto was always so quiet and just kind of, laid back and reserved that. They need more people more just out there in your face, like Tito just, yeah, Viva Puerto Rico, blah, 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 all that type of shit. That wasn't Cotto. That was Lopez. So the fast forward to get to this fight, yeah, man, Lopez, his popularity is at an apex. And everyone wants to see him fight Gamboa. That's the fight that people are really clamoring for,
Yep.
So, yeah. But I was there that night at the Garden, at the theater. And I thought it was just going to be a beatdown. But no, man, that ended up being one of the most compelling fights I'd ever seen live. And to watch how it unfolded, how Lopez is hitting him and hitting him and hitting him. Mtagwa was just a fucking tough-ass dude. You got to give a lot of African fighters credit because, like, the majority of those guys, when they get in the ring, that's the one thing they're known for is being durable. Guys like Azuma Nelson and Dick Tiger are few and far between in terms of like being all-time great fighters from the continent. But a lot of those dudes, regardless of country they come from, whether it's Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, whatever it may be, they're just known for being tough motherfuckers who come in at superb shape, and it's going to take a lot to take them out. And Mtagwa was no different. And so, like, he's going to war, and he's absorbing these bombs that no one else was taking at this point. And then, like you said, it became a war of attrition. That Lopez is because he's throwing so much and he's trying to take him out. He's like, hell, I can't do anything with this guy. That before he knows it, he's becoming exhausted himself. Kind of like I like Morrison last fight we were talking about. and then the drama starts.
And Juanma Lopez was the kind of guy where he was like, I mean, like I was saying earlier too, Rogers Mtagwa, there was no mistaking. Like he had lost almost every quality fighter he had
Yeah.
fought against, on several different levels. Martino Honorio, Agapito Sanchez, bro. He lost to Agapito Sanchez, like a
Rest
little.
in peace.
Yeah, I mean, several years even before this fight. So I think it was clear that, he was not supposed to be on this level, but he was just absorbing, dude. And Juanma Lopez is the kind of guy where, kind of like Tommy Morrison, where like when he got hurt, it's like he stayed hurt, dude. But
Yeah,
like Tommy
and he
Morrison
wasn't
too.
gonna try to clinch or like try to like back away or do nothing. Like he didn't know anything else
Yeah.
except try to hit you back.
When he could get his hands up and hit you back, he would. And he was dangerous when he was hurt. So that was what made it, like, oh, it was super dramatic. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was the problem, dude, was that Mtagwa finally kind of just like bided his time, waited for fucking Juanma Lopez to punch himself out and start getting tired, and then just attacked. And then he, I think it was like round 9, he fought, for the first time, got wobbled, and then like round 10 got like badly hurt and just like never really totally came back from that. Was just like, after that, it was just a fucking absolute war where it looked like any moment, if a bad punch landed, Juanma Lopez would be out, but it just never quite did, almost.
Nah, I was so excited because I thought an upset was coming. A lot of people did around me too. Like Mtagwa was just really pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And Lopez was falling apart. Like he clearly at the seams, he had no, he was gone. If this was a 15-round fight, there's no way he would have lasted a distance. And somehow he did. And like, you can't say he didn't deserve the decision. He built up so much in the earlier rounds that
Yeah.
was obviously, but you were just it was dramatic. And at the end, you're wondering, yo, is he gonna is he gonna make this? Because like the water kept on coming above and above his head, and he was struggling to stay afloat. Like it was tough, and that
Yeah.
Mtagwa and like his stamina, he was perfect. Like he just got stronger and stronger. And as the momentum turned his way, he saw his confidence coming on. He felt his energy and he started wailing on him. So yeah, dude,
Yeah,
great.
dude.
And what's pretty awesome too is that after the fight, there's a hotel bar across the street where a lot of people usually go to hang out after a big event at MSG. The not so much fans. A few fans will go there, but it's more so for like promoters and the industry people that kind of go there, right? And I remember that night we were all over there after the fights, and then Peltz and Mtagwa showed up, and everyone kind of gave them a standing ovation, especially Mtagwa, because he looked unscathed, like he just
And Peltz is like, hey, oh, for him. Oh.
yeah, of course, yeah. Peltz was there with the biggest smile on his face. Well, yeah, he just came in with a conquering hero. Yeah, fuck out of here. But like, yeah, everyone was really happy to see Mtagwa because he showed up and he was just kind of waving to everybody and stuff like that. And that was cool as hell to see. But
Yeah,
yeah,
dude.
man, that was a good one. Another one I wanted to bring up actually is not on my list, but one I just thought of while we were talking would be Terry Norris against it's not Guy Waters. What's his name? Troy Waters.
Troy Waters.
Troy Waters and Terry Norris. Yeah.
And Troy Waters, dude. So it's such
Really
a.
good. Hey, it actually ties in because it wasn't isn't Liam Wilson from Australia?
Yeah.
There you go. Troy Waters Australian.
Well, and just like what like such a character that definitely belongs in boxing for sure.
Troy Waters, that is?
Yeah. Just like
Yeah,
such a
yeah, he was,
like
man.
the kind of guy you'd only see in boxing.
Those guys were like the '90s Australian fighters were always a fun bunch, like because they kind of they didn't like sugarcoat what they were into. Like Jeff Harding, who was one of my favorites, talked about how he liked to lay on the beach and just drink Fosters all day. He didn't want to train, and all these dudes, but they were slam banging fighters. Really really tough as nails guys and guys that even though if they didn't have the best defense or whatever it was, they were there to rumble and they would give you the best they had for as long as it lasted. And that being said, that wasn't supposed to be shit against Terry Norris, who at that point when this fight took place was basically at the top of pound for pound list.
Yeah, dude, talk about guys who, like, we've talked about Terry Norris before and his propensity for, getting into some extracurricular activities during
Yeah,
his
yeah.
during his fights, but he could also kind of be spotty too, is the problem, dude. He could just be inconsistent. And every so often he would just put in a performance that was just like, what? Who's this guy? When like the other times you just look blinding fast, super sharp, really good punching power, but dude, his chin was just not the best.
Absolutely not. And the thing that I loved about early '90s Terry Norris, which makes him one of my all-time favorite fighters, is that he was just like you said, Pat. He was a vicious guy. Whether that meant he was going to punch you while you were down on the canvas, which was a good chance he was going to, or whatever, is one thing. But like he was just fun to watch. You were hard pressed to find another guy that was as fun to watch as Terry Norris was in the early '90s. Like he went in there and he just went to war and he was trying to knock your fucking head off. He looked pissed off to begin with. You already knew he hated your guts. He used to have the most perfect high top fade, but sometimes he would have like words like uh shaved into his head, like knockout sometimes, for instance. Remember when he had knockout, like shaved into his head, I think before the Meldrick Taylor fight? Things like that. Like Norris was the epitome of the early '90s fashion when it came to but when he would, the thing that I loved about Norris is that when he fought guys that were overmatched, he wouldn't let them last. You know, Not like other fighters who will kind of coast and fight to the level of competition and get bored and fall asleep during a fight or whatever. No, if Norris knew you didn't belong in there with him, he would take you out within a round or two and do it viciously, and then talk shit to you after he did that to make sure that you knew you didn't belong in there with him. And for me, I love that. Like Norris was my guy. He's always gonna be my guy until the day I die. But like there's one fight in 1993 when it's going to look like another routine defense where he's going to bludgeon somebody. Troy Waters, for a brief moment, flipped the script. And it made for one of the most memorable and wildest moments you could have found in the early '90s.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like that was actually it's funny too because I wouldn't have known who the fuck Troy Waters was at the time because we've talked about like, when we have come into our relative boxing
I wasn't watching boxing in '93 and know who Troy Waters was.
like
Absolutely not.
I wouldn't have been regularly watching. You know what I mean? Like that's not the kind of shit I would have been regularly watching. But that was in San Diego. It was at the San Diego Sports Arena, and it was at a time where, like, the Norris brothers they trained out of like a lot of people were like, oh, they're from San Diego. Like well, first of all, they weren't from San Diego, number one. Like no San Diego fighter ever is from San Diego except for Paul Vaden, dude. That's like the only San Diego fighter. Every other San Diego fighter, quote unquote San Diego fighter, Ken Norton was from somewhere else, but was stationed in San Diego. Archie Moore is from Georgia, I think it was, but lived in San Diego and retired in San Diego. All these San Diego fighters. But no, the Norris fighters were kind of known as San Diego fighters, but they trained out of this joint called Campo, which is in like the extreme fucking boondocks of it's like shit is not even San Diego. It's like East County, San Diego. It's a totally fucking different place. But it was close enough that, San Diego claimed them and shit. And so because of that, and they were famous and shit, I got to go. And that was like the very first shit I ever attended. And I mean, I couldn't tell you nothing about anything that really happened, though. I was fucking 9 or 10 years old or whatever. But even so, yeah, I like I said, I know nothing about Troy Waters at the time either. But Terry Norris, like you said, he kind of embodied the I don't know, spirit or whatever of the '90s. He was up on the fashion. He was always, like kind of like come out to hip hop, he had the high top fade and shit, always had the hot fucking trunks and like the outfits and shit like that. He was high paced, was aggressive, fucking hit hard, looked smooth when he was on. So yeah, dude, you would not have expected somebody like Troy Waters, who, Troy Waters, dude, he came from a boxing family. I think he was a good amateur. He was a high level amateur. So it's not like he was some nobody, and he was a decent puncher and whatnot. But it was like, you would not have expected like a Terry Norris, but the inconsistency, bro. So yeah, well, for a brief moment, he almost had Terry Norris out of there.
I mean, in round one, Norris drops him hard.
Yeah, dude. Well, and he was like, yeah, like we were just talking about, the kind of guy where he's just wobbly, dude. He loses legs, gets hit on the temple, and it was like wobble, wobble, And every so often, like he'd make his way back into a fight and stuff like that. But often he was just wrecked as soon as he got hurt, dude. Like he was fucking done for. And like yeah, just the inconsistency was killer, bro. The inconsistency from him was killer, and against a guy like Troy Waters, who was like, having his moment. That was his moment coming from fucking fighting out of, I think, the UK, but an Australian dude fighting out of the UK, coming to San Diego, fighting a dude who's, essentially fighting, I guess, in his backyard, like we were just talking about. But that's your moment, bro. That's your Liam Wilson moment. But
Yeah.
just
No, it was
passed up.
huge. It ended up scoring. He ended up becoming the round of the year for Ring Magazine, round two.
And rightly so, dude. Anytime you get the kind of back and forth, either knockdowns or, two guys getting hurt, the opponents getting hurt and shit like that, dude. I mean, that's tough to beat in a 3-minute span. That's pretty tough to beat.
No, it was incredible, and that's just what made again, like what made Norris fight so compelling is that you didn't know what was going to happen because soon after that, he loses in a major, major, major upset to Simon Brown in a fight that everyone thought that Norris was going to easily dominate in, and then Brown bouncing around like a basketball. Norris comes back, ends up scoring a shutout decision of him, probably his most boring fight you can think of. If you got to watch one, was the rematch with Brown, but he won an easy decision in the rematch. And then soon after that, in 1994, at the end of 94, going into 95, is that infamous, weird, awkward, awful trilogy that he had with the one and only Luis Santana. So, yeah.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah. Like just the first two fights are just like you get the same kind of feeling as like when you're watching Bogalada on this in the second fight where you're just like, this again? What? And
But
but
even
it
it's even more so odd because, like, the first fight, people forget because of the ending. It was actually kind of competitive. Santana wobbled Norris
mm,
at one point and, made it. He was inspired in that one. But then, Norris hit him like behind the head. Santana went down, wouldn't move. Um, and then the fiasco started where the referee was accusing Santana of faking. I've never seen that before since. And even if you think he is, you can't do that as a doctor. As the doctor, the doctor literally is saying, "I think he's faking. He can get up." Santana's laying there in the ring, sprayed out. Freddie Pacheco, the fight doctor, is ringside, going absolutely insane, screaming at someone to take care of him. I think Mitch Halpern was the referee. Mitch Halpern and the doctor in the corner conversing while Santana is laying there, unattended, unconscious in the middle of the ring. It was an absolute fiasco. So yeah, and then they had the rematch, and like you said, another fiasco happened before Norris finally got rid of him once and for all in their third fight. But
yeah, I definitely feel like there was some acting from Santana going on in
tons of
those
acting
fights.
there.
But,
Absolutely,
but
especially the second fight.
but I mean, but at the same time, it's kind of like the chickens coming home to roost, bro. Like, stop fouling people, Terry. Stop
Everything. Yeah.
fouling them.
The second fight, Norris and the ding, 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 pow, hits him clearly after the bell.
Yeah, like it's like ding, back. Dude,
Then he hit
no.
him, and Santana, who got dropped in the first round, barely
Ah,
landed the whole fight,
ah,
knew he was going to get
ah,
knocked out. Just
ah.
dropped like that. Two fights in a row, he got stretched out and won the fight.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Terry. I love you.
Oh man. Yeah, I know. But it was, bro. It's so
One of my
inconsistent.
all-time favorite people, man. I remember at the Hall of Fame. I don't know if it was the year he got inducted or a different year, but we were there. We were at Graziano's bar, and I'm just a kid. Like again, I've told you stories where I'm like way under 21, hanging at the bar with all these old fighters. They're buying me drinks. I'm just like hanging around and bouncing around like just in my element. You know what I mean? Because they all love me. And I'm hanging out with Terry Norris, and like I don't know. I think I have a beer and he has something, and we're drinking and we're talking. And I said something that made him laugh, and he doubled over and he decided to punch me in the stomach because he was laughing so hard from it. He's like, ah, 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 ah. And like he hits me, not hard, but like enough that it made me double over and start gagging. Because it was just like a love tap. He was like, ha, ha, ha. And he kind of slapped me. I just went, whoa. And I just kind of looked at him. I was like, the fuck, you get a Sugar Ray Leonard flashback or something?
No shit. I'm not knocked down right now, bro. Don't hit me.
And then he just grabbed me and laughed even harder. I'm just like, oh. You know the part Richard Pryor said in his stand up where he said when you get the air knocked out of you, he was like, you ever hear air just say fuck it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he just had the air just knocked out. It was like, ooh, ooh, ooh. Norris is there still laughing. I'm like, no. It makes you wonder how hard you actually hit if you just kind of love tap me slapping as in a joking
Yeah, no
way.
shit, dude. Yeah. Well, that gives you an idea right there.
Oh God.
All right, let's see. All right, I got a pretty good one. this is as far back as I went. So in 1971 on the undercard of Muhammad Ali versus Buster Mathis in Houston, former heavyweight title challenger by the name of Cleveland Williams fought George Chuvalo. And that was definitely, I mean, Cleveland Williams had years before this been shot and had, was injured badly when he was shot and had, and we might be doing an episode about Cleveland Williams in the near future, but he, had a significant portion of his intestine removed. And after that, it's basically said that he was never the same fighter. He was never in quite the same shape. He never looked quite the same way. His mobility was a little bit limited because I think he had also had a leg injury.
Well, Pat, I don't mean to cut you off really quick, but like with the significant injury he had, wasn't it true that the doctor said if he wasn't in the condition that he was in, that he would have died immediately?
That's
Because
what
like
they said.
you gotta think of the physical specimen Cleveland Williams was. This guy was an absolute Adonis, especially in an era where dudes weren't body beautiful like that back then.
And I'm not going to say that like cheating or whatever didn't exist. I'm sure it did, but not to the point where like they didn't have EPO, they didn't have HGH, testosterone,
I don't even think Williams
anabolics. They did not have any of that shit. Basically, it was just like you worked hard, and I'm sure a lot of it was genetics or whatever, certain people, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But point being, the dude was a fucking ripped beast, just an absolute scary looking son of a bitch, dude. And he could punch like a motherfucker. And so, but at this point, even so, yeah. And so, yeah, to answer what you were saying, yes, when it was reported that basically he was in surgery or recovering from surgery in the newspapers, the doctor on hand, because he had gotten shot by, I think it was a state trooper or a highway patrolman, I can't remember which, but in any case, he got shot by law enforcement, and he had gotten transferred to the hospital and wound up needing, if I'm not mistaken, like a blood transfusion. And so got it and recovered. And one of the doctors on hand was basically like, he would be dead if he weren't in such good shape. And if you look at him, you'd be like, so pretty much everybody would be dead but him, because he's in absolutely amazing shape. But even then, so that's years before this. In 1971, and I mean, George Chuvalo himself, it was, he was experienced, but in 1971, Cleveland Williams was supposed to be pretty much just shot, like non-existent in the heavyweight division. I have no idea what the hell he's supposed to be doing.
And Ali already poleaxed him at that point, right?
Yeah, it was like years before.
Or something,
yeah, years before. And Sonny Liston, and that was years after Sonny Liston had taken care of him twice, and the second time with extreme prejudice, just like absolutely beating the shit out of his face, like Cleveland Williams' face when Sonny Liston kicks his ass the second time. He looks like bewildered, like he just looks like, get me out of here, please. Well,
Cleveland Williams also too, you have to say, by 1971, that is a significant time, because Cleveland Williams' career started actually in the early 50s. Like he was around for a long time. He was one of the charter members.
He had no business still being around.
No, not at all. He was one of the charter members of the Customado against Contenders Club, where anyone with a pulse was not going to get a chance against Floyd Patterson. So, yeah, Cleveland Williams was part of one of those lost generations of heavyweights in the 50s. We talked about the lost generation of the 80s for different reasons, drugs, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. The lost generation of heavyweights of the 50s was mainly a lost generation because of one man, Customado. Floyd Patterson's manager, who made sure anybody who had a remote chance of disposing his champion off the perch was automatically aligned with the mafia and therefore didn't deserve a title fight, and yada, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, Cleveland Williams was at the very top of that list. So.
And I mean, it's tough to say. I don't know. He was vulnerable himself. He didn't have the greatest chin.
I honestly think Patterson would have beat him in a fight, but like
probably
he did. But it's safe to say, yeah, he was avoided like the plague back then. Just because.
Yeah, but we don't know because he avoided him. So it's like
that's exactly
And
not so much Floyd.
Yeah, he's I definitely have mixed feelings about him, especially like hindsight being 2020 and not. There's a lot of just weird, wonky shit going on with Cuss. what we won't get into that. Point is, yeah, without question, Williams was kind of avoided and then got fucked over with his injury, getting shot. And then, at this point in 1971, he was done. He wasn't really a contender, really, at any point. The only win that he had gotten, and this is another potential, if I could even find more information on him, because I've already tried and can't really, but Ted Gulick, who had a very awful end himself. That was the only, real serious win he'd had in a few years, or a year or two. And basically, he wasn't really. If you're getting defeated by Jack O'Halloran, you're in bad trouble, dude. With all due respect, you're in bad trouble. Alvin Blue Lewis is knocking you out. You're in bad shape. So yeah, George.
Bad fighters, but this ain't top tier guys over here.
No, yeah, not terrible guys, but guys you should be beating if you're a contender.
And if Williams was, and let's be honest, if Williams was in his prime or even close to it, he probably would have beat these guys.
Yeah, you would have teed off on Jack O'Halloran like something awful, just been absolutely terrible. And so, yeah, this was not a fight. People were kind of like, where is this going? This is on the undercard of Ali. This is terrible. But then without, bro, it's on YouTube. People can go watch it for themselves. It's not necessarily, I don't know if it would fall under the category of war, but it's a very good fight, like an unexpectedly good fight. And the kind of fight where, especially with Chuvalo, if Chuvalo did not have the kind of chin he had, dude, Cleveland Williams might have been able to get something done in there, because he landed some fucking wrecking bombs on him.
Absolutely, man. Chuvalo is known as probably having the most solid chin in heavyweight history, and rightfully so. Like, he was never knocked off his feet.
Even just looks like his chin is like, it's like big.
He
didn't look right.
Oh yeah. The times I met him at the Hall of Fame, the few times I met him in the early 2000s, dude was just a cinder block. You know what I mean? Just thick and strong. Like you said, his head, it was just strong, and his jawline and everything. Like, you can see why he was able to absorb that shit. And imagine getting in the ring with like Foreman, Frazier, Cleveland Williams, all these other monster punchers. Floyd Patterson teed off on him. Everybody did at one point. You name it. Chuvalo had a long, long career from the 50s, the late 50s, all the way into the mid 70s. Like, think about this. All right, to give you an example how long Chuvalo was around for, Trevor Berbick was around chasing him around for a fight for the Canadian heavyweight title before Chuvalo retired. That's how long Chuvalo was around for, okay? Like, Trevor Berbick was in the 76 Olympics, so Chuvalo was still an active fighter, kind of, around 1977, 78, somehow. I don't know if there's any recorded fights of him, but I think he was still holding the Canadian title at that point. Regardless, yeah, he was around for a long, long time, and that was his main thing, was having a shock absorber of a chin, because he was rugged, he was physically strong, but he wasn't a knockout puncher, and he wasn't a great boxer, and he was extremely slow. So
it was only Foreman and Frazier that stopped him, and one was because his eye was just an absolute shit shape, and his face was falling apart. But in both instances, he's basically like, what are you doing stopping it? Like, absolutely getting bludgeoned and like almost half to death, and is still going like, what are you doing? It's like, what a absolutely frightening human being. Oh my God.
And it's incredible too, that considering his longevity of his career and the competition that he faced and the amount of punishment that he took, that he was with it, mentally wise, for a number of years. Reports have come out the past few years that clearly he's on the back end now and not doing too good, and
yeah,
everything caught up with him, unfortunately. But the times I met him, and even years after that, like,
facing Ali, he was in that.
Facing Ali, bro. I'm saying, man, the amount of detail he was putting into that, like, he had dates down, he had this down, he was explaining this, explaining that. He explained how he got in the ring after the second Ali listed fight and confronted Ali about how it was bullshit. Like, he was probably, out of anyone on that entire episode, out of that entire series when that came out, probably the most articulate guy. Like, in terms of just remembering things and just breaking things down for you, Like, it was incredible. Sure. So it's sad now to know that, like, I guess it's all caught up to him, and there's, like, I don't know, like, legal battles in terms of who takes care of him or his family and all this stuff. I know there's been some strife, but yeah, it's pretty incredible he lasted as long as he did, as just being normal. Good call. As a deep cut, that's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely, I guess the whole point is like unexpected shit. So,
Exactly.
we're gonna be pulling some shit out of our ass here. What you got another one?
So no, I'm gonna bring up my last one, and this one isn't a deep cut, and it's a fight we've talked about multiple times. But if you don't bring this up, you're doing a disservice to this whole subject, and that's Salvador Sanchez and Zuma Nelson.
It's maybe, we did a show before where it was, I want to say it was like last minute replacements or something like that.
Yeah. We really went to a deep thing about this fight.
And we
So
definitely talked more about it, but dude, it's a great fight. It's a great subject.
it
Both
is.
fighters are fun to talk about. There's some Don King in there. There's a little bit of Mickey Duff.
Yeah, it's incredible, and the way it all comes together. Sanchez is legitimately one of the greatest Mexican fighters in history, and at that point, he was one of the most popular fighters on the planet, and he was rightfully so one of the top 3 or 5 best fighters on the planet. You know what I mean? Like his credentials proved it. Twice beat Danny Little Red Lopez. The defenses that he made against Juan Laporte, Ruben Navarro, I think it was his first title defense. The other guys, Pat Cornell and Patrick Ford and stuff like that. List goes on. Like Sanchez was a fighting champion, and then finally when he fights Wilfredo Gomez, and at that point was probably the biggest little guy fight in history up until then. And he bludgeons Gomez in a great fight. You know what I mean? Like broke his cheekbone, dropped him in the first round, beat the shit out of him the whole fight. And Gomez was supposed to win that fight. Not to say that there was people thinking Sanchez wasn't going to win, but Gomez was like, it was definitely the favorite. He had a much longer record. He had been, had been featured more than
Oh, he was the
Sanchez.
more proven star. Like I know people like
Totally.
to, people retcon the history, bro, and it's not
Yeah,
it's not true. But that's what makes it even more impressive is the thing. They fuck it up.
exactly. And when you think about how beautiful, Gomez, no one was able to do shit to Gomez back then. Like he was just a two-fisted monster, and Sanchez in the first round
And
came out
mean.
hard, mean as shit. Angry, arrogant, you want to name it, that's what he was. Sanchez comes out there, drops him in the first round, beats him up throughout the entire fight. Don't get me wrong, Gomez has his moments. That's what makes it a great fight, but you just never get the, Sanchez had one of the great chins too. Like the way Danny Lopez dropped bombs on him, Gomez, anything like that. Sanchez would just blink and keep on going. And that's what he kind of did. And then, that ending flurry where Gomez is on the ropes and Sanchez pop, 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 coming up and just boom. And you see Gomez just dropping the heat and he looks in so much pain and his eye is swollen. The other one's fucked up. Like, there was at that point, no one thought anyone was going to touch Sanchez. Like, and rightfully so. The only fight people were clamoring for was a fight where it was either the fight with Eusebio Pedroza for featherweight supremacy, or the rumblings were he was going to bypass junior lightweight and go challenge Alexis Arguello.
Mm-hmm. Oh my
And that was the
god!
one, dude. I
Can't believe we
sat
didn't get that. The
my
fuck?
God. And that was Don King because Don King had Gomez, not Gomez. He had Sanchez and he had Arguello back then.
He
And
would have
like
made that happen.
he would have. Oh yeah, oh yeah. This is before Don was really getting funny and like marinating shit and all that in the '90s. Like back then, he was much more quicker to try to make big fights and to maximize the profit if he could, and he was ready to make that fight. So yeah, this is where Sanchez was, and that's why a guy like Azuma Nelson, who was only 13-0, coming from Ghana in the early '80s, where if you try to catch a lot, you had to be like someone like Flash Gordon to get any type of information on a guy like Azuma Nelson back then. You know what I mean? This isn't the days of BoxRec. This isn't the day of the internet. This isn't, YouTube where you can find some kind of clip of this guy. No one knew nothing about him. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, dude, it was Mickey Duff had gotten involved and basically, Azuma Nelson had gotten this opportunity and he'd gotten it way late. He'd stepped in at the last minute when an opportunity had come up. And basically, there was a lot of skepticism and people like, who is this guy? There's not going to be a lot of credibility. We don't know what to do. And of course, people on Azuma Nelson's side are just like, we chill, dude. Just just wait. All right. And they were right. They took a big gamble going in there with Salvador Sanchez. And of course, there's a couple of extenuating factors in there. Like Salvador Sanchez didn't really know who he was getting in with. But on the flip side, Azuma Nelson had the last minute get in with Salvador Sanchez. That's big on his part too. And he turned in a really incredible performance, all things considered. throughout his career, Azuma Nelson wound up proving himself to be a serious workhorse, the kind of fighter that like just you just didn't want to be in against when he had any sort of rhythm or momentum or was on. He was an absolute nightmare. He had a really difficult style to deal with that was like just the right blend of defense and just, he was a countering fucking machine. And I mean, he was an absolute nightmare to fight. It proved years after that he just had not developed. He was very green, very inexperienced, and even so was pushing Salvador Sanchez, man, really pushing him.
Well, yeah, to get back to your point where you said about Mickey Duff and those guys. So Sanchez was supposed to defend against a guy named Mario Miranda, who was a Colombian puncher and top contender. Miranda pulled out, and then, like you said, like at the last minute, Nelson gets brought in there, and no one knows anything about Nelson. But if you look at Nelson's record, if he's enough to score a box rec, you'll see that in his first pro fight he won 10 rounds, which is wild to think about, actually. Like we hear a guy, like Lomachenko turned pro, he won a world title fight, his first pro fight. Some guys, like in the surrounding areas, they will turn pro and like fight experienced dudes right off. Mostly kickboxers from Thailand and shit like that. But Nelson turns pro, he's already a 10 rounder. And besides an odd 8 rounder at some point, all of his fights up to Sanchez are 10 rounders and 12 rounders. They don't go the distance, but I mean, they give you an example of like what he was already dealing with. So I mean, like he's getting the rounds and he's getting some fights in and getting some experience. By the time he fights Sanchez, he's already a Commonwealth champion of Europe. So like he's not an absolute pushover, but this is a huge leap going from fighting guys like Brian Roberts or someone like that, David Capo, to fighting Salvador Sanchez. So, but yeah, when this fight gets made and they bring it up and when the deal gets made, they ask Mickey Duff, so you're bringing one of these guys over. Mickey Duff, former manager who's been known to work with fighters from Africa, most notably John Beast Mugabe, right? Or was that George Francis? Did Mickey Duff have something to do with him?
Wasn't
George Francis that had? I think that was George Francis that might have had Mugabe. But regardless,
wow.
Mickey Duff,
either way,
Duff knew what he was doing. And when they asked him before the fight, oh, you work with the kid, fight, blah blah blah. Duff literally said, ha 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 ha. He was like, you'll see. You have no idea what you guys just got yourself into with this kid. And Nelson was motivated. Apparently, before the fight, they said Nelson showed up at MSG and ran all the stairs and the bleachers all around the entire arena because he was just like so wound up. You know what I mean? And yeah, Pat, he gets in there and puts on one of the most incredible fights that you can imagine. Like Sanchez had no idea what he was getting himself in with, and the thing is, even though Nelson really didn't either, Nelson at least had tape to watch on Sanchez because Sanchez was featured so much on television. So it wasn't like an unknown thing he was getting himself in there with. Totally. And like the first few rounds, Nelson, if you watch later Nelson fights, you've seen him in the 90s and all that. Like you said, he's more of a counter puncher. He's not that aggressive, kind of leans back and waits for the other guy. This fight, he's aggressive as shit. He ain't holding them back. He gets in there and he has a special blend of power, speed, and awkwardness. Because he comes in like kind of jumping in at some point. Like he's very aggressive, but it's like, and it's hard to gauge. Like Sanchez, who's a guy that likes to, hate to use the word, using, filling in data or whatever stupid people say about
he's the Matrix.
Yeah. Sanchez is a guy that likes to study his opponent, to figure out what he was working with. And then after a couple of rounds starts building off of that and then, goes through it. He had no idea, and like clearly he looked a little bewildered at first. And I think at one point in the corners, he even says to his trainers, he's like, "I'm not feeling strong right now, and this guy is like a little weird." And they're just like, "Okay, it's okay, just settle down, you'll figure it out." And he does. That's what makes a great fighter. Sanchez, each round he adjusts a little bit more, until round 7, where finally, after Nelson has been actually commanding most of the early rounds and Sanchez is a little behind, Sanchez finally breaks through round 7 and lands one of his trademark like left hooks as they're like going through a flurry, because Sanchez finally was able to start like timing Nelson's flurries. And as he did that, he caught him, boom, and that was the first time you saw Nelson. Did he get dropped? I think he did get dropped.
Yeah, and because he's got this look on his face like, what?
Yeah. And from there, the tide starts slowly turning. Nelson is still highly competitive and even steals some of the rounds after that. But that's when the war really starts. because like now it's like a war of attrition. There's Nelson, there's Sanchez. Sanchez now is like building off of that, and Sanchez, who had one of, if not the greatest endurance system in history, that guy never got tired ever.
And a poker face like a motherfucker too.
Like it was what a tough guy to fight. And each round, he seems like he's getting a little bit stronger as Nelson is faltering each round. And then, and by round 15, Sanchez still looks like he's in round one. Again, his conditioning was ridiculous. You know, I don't even know. Like, I think it might be a secret because no one's really uncovered what it was that made him so just like impervious to getting tired. But like, you know, that was one of his main traits. And Nelson, on the other hand, looked like he just ran 30 miles and like he's at the end of a war right now. Like he was worn out, completely worn out. And at that point, Sanchez was able to finish him off. But you can't deny at that point, man, that was an incredible fight, a beautiful fight, one of my all-time favorites. And on a personal note, I owned a program for that fight that went missing back in December. So
Yeah,
and I only had a couple of people in my apartment in December. So someone clearly jacked it out of my place because they're a piece of shit. But
I hope that is not the case, bro. But I do hope that you come across that program again. Or
I
if
really
anybody else does, please let me know.
absolutely. But I just, you know, all that being said, this fight had to be mentioned. That really sums it up right there. Like a fight that on paper no one expected much of. Who the hell is Azuma Nelson? Um, Even actually a guy that I follow on Twitter, uh, Rob Silva, I think is his name, is something like that. He's a born and raised in New York, and he's an older guy. Like I think he's in his early 50s now or so. But he used to go to all the fights with his dad. Like we've talked about it a couple of times. All the MSG fights in the 70s and 80s, and I think he went to Sanchez Nelson, and he told me that he was fighting with his dad before too. That he didn't want to go because he didn't know who Nelson was and he thought it was gonna be a bullshit fight.
Yeah. Well, luckily his dad won that one then.
Yeah. Look what ended up happening. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's like I said, that's basically like a quintessential kind of like last minute replacement, unexpected, like oh shit,
Totally.
type of fight. So it's a great shout and it's a great example. I
Yeah.
only have one more and it'll be fairly brief just because in part because I don't have like a ton of information and uh, it was the kind of fight that was like, it came not so much out of nowhere, but again, unexpected war or whatever. Leo Doran versus Paul Spadafora. I mean, I'm trying to throw some out there also that were kind of fights that have gone forgotten or whatever, and
Yes.
especially
Totally.
at the time were either popular or recognized as good fights. And dude, this shit was a very good fight. I remember this shit was in contention for fight of the year that year, no question. And it wound up being a draw. But also I thought that Leonard Doran probably should have won. But one of the things that makes it somewhat not as unexpected, I suppose, is the fact that Leonard Doran had gotten into that war in the first fight with Raul Balbi, and
What a
that
fight that was.
dude, a great fight, almost kind of in the vein of a what was it, Somchak Sith Chachawal versus
Yeah.
Meyer Monshapur, where it's like two
Yes.
dudes who you don't even know who the fuck these guys are, or at least most fans don't, and they're just like putting on some shit. You're just like, holy fuck, they're throwing down. And similarly, Leo Doran and Raul Balbi, Leo Doran, Romanian guy, Raul Balbi, I'm pretty sure Spanish. And so, to American fans, like they just, if people aren't American fans are fucking weird about it. But it was on the undercard of Mickey Ward versus Jesse James Leha, which in and of itself is a kind of interesting fight because there's the cut and it ended early and nothing really wound up happening. But that fight was supposed to be like a war. People are like, oh shit, Mickey Ward. Then Leha's been in some wars ended all shitty. But then Jesse James Leha gets the shot against Costizu, and instead Mickey Ward, who would have gotten that shot had he won, goes and has the fucking trilogy with Arturo Gatti. So that's, I mean, just saying, there's some
Everything worked
history.
out well. Yeah.
There's
Thank
some
God, because
fucking.
imagine how badly Ward would have got butchered by
Oh
Costas.
God, oh God. But it would have been a great payday. But it's I don't know. So you got the trilogy against Gotti and you got Immortality. I don't know.
No, that's a great shout because Leonard Doreen and Paul Spadafora was, I probably, be honest, I don't think I've watched it since it happened. And that fight's what, 20 years old now or so? 21 years old
Yeah, I
probably.
mean, let's see. I think it was 2004, so
Oh,
19 years old. But
yeah,
wait, 2003, 2004, something like that. But
around
point is, yeah, it's a long time ago, and
there.
that shit was a good, just bloody, bruising, and awkward fight too, because fucking Leo Doran was like definitely a swarmer, like a little dude with short arms that just threw a billion punches, and then Paul Spadafora is just an awkward, fucking angling southpaw turning fucking zip 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 type of shit. It was just like Jesus. There had been rumors for a couple of years about the Mayweather sparring footage. Dude, people don't remember this shit, but like on Google or bulletin boards and message boards, dude, there are fucking rumors about like, oh yeah, Spadafora kicked Floyd's ass one time. People are like, shut the fuck up. No, he didn't. And then finally, like, people were like about to release the fucking footage and then didn't. And then they released it on a pay-per-view. People don't remember this shit, bro, but this shit happened. In any case, so but Paul Spadafore was the type of fighter who was like he had held a lightweight belt for a little bit, but he was spotty, dude. He didn't have a lot of punching power, and if you had a lot of punching power or were really aggressive, you could kind of make him look shitty and overwhelm him. But like, he was a good fighter, just not a lot of punching power, and that hurt. And so you had this guy, not a lot of punching power, Leo Doran, Swarmer. It just wasn't supposed to be a super good fight. It wound up being a fucking war.
It really was, and I think it was on HBO. Everyone was pleasantly surprised by that because Spadafora was a very safe. I wouldn't call him safety first. He would usually stay in the pocket with you, but like he was a boxer. Couldn't punch worth a damn. Couldn't punch at all for that matter, and was like slick, would just make you slip on the inside and then turn you, twist you, do all. Think he was a cutie. And there was a couple of
100%.
fights of it. Yeah, there's a couple of fights of his that were a little bit more entertaining than others. Like I remember he got dropped against Victoriano Sosa a couple of times
Yeah.
unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And that looked like that was an upset in the making until Four ended up winning. And his fight on the first HBO KO Nation against some brawler name, I think Mike Griffith or something like that, Griffin, whatever. That fight was a little entertaining too. Maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But yeah, Spadafore for the most part was just known to be like he would always go the distance, and he probably beat you by a wide margin, 120, 108, 118, 110, whatever. Kind of like he did when he won the vacant title against Pito Cardona. It was slap you around. But Doreen being so aggressive the way he was, and Spadafora actually, I think, slowing down a little bit because if it's around the time period you're saying, I think he was already probably starting to have out of the ring troubles. Um, you know, it just made for a very compelling fight. And Doreen, whose style was always built to made for fun fights with anybody, just again was able to do that. The only fight, which is kind of funny in retrospect, that wasn't a fun fight because and is against Vittorio Gotti and Doreen because
Yeah.
everybody was hyped about that. That's gonna be the
I
fight of the day.
know.
I was too. We all were.
I was like, oh, a swarmer against a fucking dude who was a
Yeah,
warrior and a big
like,
power. Oh, this is gonna be
everybody was
great.
just like, "Are you serious? This is gonna be awesome. It's gonna be awesome." Blah blah blah. And of course, Gotti just ripped the dude's liver out of his body with one hook, and that was it.
Jesus. Yeah. And I remember not too long before that, Doran had fought Chucky T.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Remember
Yeah.
Charles Chornovsky?
That's a
Fucking
blast.
legend. Fucking
Yeah, Doreen
legend.
was a fun fighter, but that was the one. Everyone was like, "Oh man, he's gonna fight Gotti," and we were hyped. The undercard was Jesse James Leija against Bajado, and that was a good HBO card. And I told my dad, "Don't tell me what happened. Don't tell me what happened," because I was going out that night on a date or something. I was like, "Don't tell me what happened. I'll watch it when I get home," because I think he VHS'd it, and I got home. Yeah, I was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, Bajado got fucking shook, and then Durin got fucking took.
Yeah. You know what's sad too is that I think at one point, again, another fight I haven't watched since then. I probably won't anymore, but I think Doreen was coming on a little bit where they had a couple of like, lively exchanges where you're like, "Oh shit, this is gonna be fun." Like, all right, here they go, they're warming up, and then it ended.
Where? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not Doreen. I said I think they had a couple of lively
Yeah,
exchanges.
like
Like,
it started like it looked like all
yeah,
right, Durin's gonna start kind of landing some punches here, and then it just burp that
yeah.
fucking body shot ended matters, bro. Fuck. Yeah, I mean, dude,
I just think that's probably the best scenario because that was gonna end up being a war if not.
the good thing is that I think everything that we've talked about is on YouTube. So it's
Yeah,
like
it
you
is.
just to just go back and follow along. No,
There's other
that's
fights too we wanted to bring them, like, there's other fights too I wanted to mention, but there's only so much time.
yeah.
Like,
You had a long list.
yeah, you had Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas, which the anniversary of that's coming up, so that might be an episode coming up soon. Mickey Ward, Reggie Green. You know what I mean? That was one of those Friday night fights that Reggie Green was a good fighter, fringe contender. I mean, fought for the title a couple of times, but always a step below. And Ward at that point was exciting, but I don't think he had really developed the reputation yet of being an all and out like blood and guts guy. Like he kind of had it, but like he didn't have the dance partners yet. You know what I mean? His most compelling fight at that point, I think, was still Alfonso Sanchez. So, and
Well,
then
and seconds before that, they're talking about, can they please just stop this fight? I hate this fight. I want to die. Like they're like throwing some crazy hyperbole out,
and
and
rightfully
then
so because Ward wasn't doing shit. That
oh
was
yeah, that was awful.
yeah, absolutely awful. But Mickey Ward, Reggie Green ended up being one of the best Friday night fights ever aired. And as far as I know, I don't think it's on YouTube. I think a couple of people were griping about it the other day. Our buddy Reggie Dunlop from Twitter, and Eric Raskin, I think, were talking about it on their own, saying that the fight wasn't on there. So Mark Medell, Carlos Santos, which was a junior middleweight title fight in the 80s. Santos was known as a runner, and Medell wasn't known as much of a guy himself, but those two ended up putting on at that point was the best title fight the junior middleweight division had seen up until, I don't know, probably Trinidad and Vargas. And then we mentioned that one. And then Paulie Ayala, Johnny Tapia, because I'm sure people thought that'd be a fun fight, competitive fight. Both guys threw a lot of punches, but they never thought it'd end up being the fight of the year where Tapia would end up losing. Yeah. Now that I talk about their second fight was kind of meh, that Tapia should have won, but that first fight was awesome.
Yeah, the first fight was just punches, dude. Yeah.
And the last one I came up with was Joe Louis, Billy Conn.
Joe Louis, big favorite. Billy Conn wasn't supposed to, it wasn't like back and forth action per se, but it was like,
but what I mean, imagine us being alive back then, right? And let's say Twitter was around or everything like that. Everyone would just be like, "Oh my God, what's happening here?"
Pretty sure it was voted fight of the year.
Oh, it totally was. Oh yeah, it was. And it ended up being, and it was in years later when Ring Magazine in the '90s did their 100 best title fights ever. It was ranked relatively high. I know.
I mean, significance or whatever, sure, but like sustained action.
Also,
not really.
This is the same publication that rated Dempsey Firpo #2 back then. So yeah.
Dude, I love Dempsey and Firpo and all that shit, dude. But it's just like, go watch the fight. It ain't like that, dude. I mean, it's good, but it ain't like that.
Oh, it's a nice.
We've brought up like 7 fights on this show alone that are better than like
better than that shit. Yeah,
like just on this episode, like fucking Sith Chacho, all my shit shits on it, like a lot. Are you kidding me? Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I'm with you. No, that's a good call too, dude. Louis Conn, just definitely.
Well, just because I mean, like, I'm not going to say that Billy Conn was a member of the Bum of the Month Club. I'm sure people back then gave him more credit, but he was undersized. Louis was at his peak. This was before the war when Louis was still blasting dudes left and right, and Conn put on an incredible performance that Louis was just befuddled by. Like it was.
Well,
like,
and he was a former middleweight too. Yeah. So like people were like, that's what they were saying.
He looked like a little guy compared to him. He was tiny, very tiny. He couldn't just stand back and just box him. Like he had to jump in and flurry and jump back out and use all of his fucking guile and skill for that one. It's a beautiful performance. Probably one of the most better in terms of like boxing, ring generalship and just skill and everything. It's up there as one of the most impressive performances you'll ever see until he finally decides to get it.
Right until the end. What's the use of being Irish if you can't be stupid? Like,
and then Louis landed the most vicious combination, right? You see when Conn gets hurt, you see him like you little.
Oh yeah, he was mad. He was mad. He was like, you're not getting up, buddy.
And then Conn just holds his head up, and you see him slowly go down.
Yeah, he just kind of slumps in that one. The rematch was like, oh, just sickening knockout. Like, oh.
Well, by that point, Louis was washed up. He was in the army. Conn was even more washed than Louis was.
Yeah. You missed your chance, buddy. That was it, and you missed it. No, that's a good call, dude. And I think we came up with a pretty solid list. And obviously, there's going to be a lot since we talked about some somewhat obscure stuff overall, dude. There's going to be people, you forgot about blah, blah, blah. What about blah? Bro, we're not trying to do a comprehensive list. Just having fun. Just having fun, bro. Relax. Hey, man, I appreciate it, though, dude. You did your homework. I did mine. It's a lot of fun.
Always, always. It's a blast as always.
For sure, man. Thanks so much. And everybody who listened in, thank you so much. If you listen in via those newfangled podcasting apps they got these days, go ahead and subscribe and give us a rating if you would. We appreciate that. But if you watched on YouTube, which we've been doing a lot more lately, thank you. Thank you very much. Subscribe there as well. Leave a comment. We'll try to get back to you. There have actually been more comments than normal lately, so I haven't been able to return. Blah blah blah. You got it. We'll try to return them, but thank you. As far as social media goes, the Knuckles and Gloves podcasts on both Facebook and Instagram, also on Twitter, which may not be working at any given time. Who knows? But if it is working, we're there. But individually, we're also
Dying
there.
site. Dying site.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the time being, Aris is there as Punch Zone Aris, and for the time being, I'm also there as Patrick M. Connor. So say hello, and we'll also say hi back if we can, Aris. Talk soon, bro.
Sounds good, y'all. Be good.
Later, everybody.